Public session dealing with item number 8, which is EU scrutiny for the public record. Before we proceed with the business as listed, the committee agreed that Schedule B item COM 2019-6 and Schedule A items COM 2018-825 do not warrant further scrutiny. Further details will be published on the committee's website. Item number 9 is the engagement of the role of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in the delivery of the National Children's Hospital. I want to welcome Mr. Watt and your officials. And if you like, give us your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chair.
And if you wish, you can cut through some of it if you wish. Just give us the...
Give me the abridged version. It's all great, Chair, but I'll try to
as usual
focus on the best bits. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Well, thank you for the invitation to discuss the role of the Department in relation to the National Paediatric Hospital. The committee is aware that my department is not the sponsoring agency or the sanctioning authority of this project. In addition, I'm not the accounting officer for this project. The committee be aware that I've submitted a detailed document, Chair, addressing the matters raised in the letter of invitation. I do not propose to go through that in detail, but I take this opportunity in this opening statement to set out a few issues. Firstly, my department's role in respect of capital projects, my department's role in respect of the National Paediatric Hospital, and the role of the Office of Government Procurement in relation to the issues being discussed here today. The Department of Public Expenditure and Reform's responsibility in overseeing the effective implementation of the NDP in respect of capital projects is to set the overall five-year multi-annual capital expenditure ceilings for each ministerial group, settle with each department how these multi-annual ceilings are reflected and refined in the annual estimates which are voted annually by the Dáil. It should be noted decisions on how and where these allocations are invested in is a matter in the first instance for the relevant minister and department in line with the conditions of the delegated sanction. That is the formal approval to spend monies voted upon by the Dáil, which they receive via the relevant vote section in my department. We monitor actual spend against monthly expenditure profiles based on information submitted by departments to DEPR's relevant vote section so as to keep track of aggregate spend by each department compared to planned spend or profile spend. And note that DEPR does not approve expenditure at an individual project level, but of course projects that are sanctioned by the government, for projects over 100 million where the government is the sanctioning authority, of course we would brief the Minister for Finance and give our views to the Minister in the context of debates at government. We maintain the national frameworks within which departments operate to ensure appropriate accounting for and value for money in public expenditure, such as the Public Financial Procedures and the Public Spending Code. The National Development Plan and Project Ireland do not change the long-established arrangements for oversight, monitoring and management of voted Exchequer resources. Exchequer funding continues to be managed through the normal systems for control of voted funds. Departments and agencies are still responsible for delivering their projects within their budget allocations. Two features of capital expenditure are monitored each month: aggregate capital and carryover spend in the year to date and compared to profile and spend in the previous year. And departments which are significantly ahead of or behind profile, in other words, actual spend ahead or behind profile, and the reasons for the variation. Departments must provide an explanation for variances. Where necessary, DEPR liaise with departments through vote sections to ensure that significant variance in respect of actual spend are addressed and overall expenditure stays on track over the course of the year. End-year monitoring for December reviews the annual position, including comparing the percentage of the REV capital allocation spent compared to the previous 10 years. Any capital unspent by each department is identified along with the amount of carryover into the following year. And this, I think, is a particularly important change introduced a number of years ago, which ensures that we don't have the practice of unnecessary spending at year-end, departments trying to spend capital in a hurry towards the end of the year, so departments are allowed to carry over amounts into the next year, which is a very good management, from a budget management perspective, is a sensible approach. The focus is on budgetary aggregates and not performance on individual projects, which is the responsibility of individual departments and accounting officers. My department has responsibility for the Public Spending Code, which sets out the rules, procedures and guidance to ensure value for money in current and capital public expenditure. It sets out the rules and guidance on the oversight and management of spending at each stage of the capital project cycle, including setting the responsibilities lie with different capital expenditure project roles, setting out appraisal requirements where differing levels of public expenditure will be incurred, and setting out approval requirements at different project stages. The main roles in the context of responsibility for capital expenditure projects are the sponsoring agency and the sanctioning authority. The department or agency proposing and implement a project is the sponsoring agency. It is responsible for appraisal, planning, implementation, management and post-project review. The sponsoring agency was responsible for developing a project proposal, which is then submitted to the sanctioning authority for decision and approval at each designated stage, or gate as we call it, in the project life cycle. The department or body funding the project and which is responsible for project approval is the sanctioning authority. The sanctioning authority must satisfy itself the sponsoring agency has the appropriate systems to ensure the project is delivered in line with the approval it is given. The sanctioning authority is responsible for approval in principle at the key designated stages in the project cycle, namely following appraisal, approval to proceed to tender, and approval to accept a tender if the project has significantly changed, such as an increase in costs. As the Chair will be aware and the Committee will be aware, for projects costing over 100 million, the Government is the sanctioning authority. The day-to-day oversight functions in those instances are the responsibility of the relevant department which is funding the project. And DEPR is not the sanctioning authority for the majority of capital projects. DEPR is only the sanctioning authority for the capital projects funded by its vote group, which accounts for less than 3% of the overall voted capital expenditure. To support departments as they work to achieve value for money in investment in capital infrastructure, a suite of key reforms have been introduced to support the effective implementation of Project Ireland 2040. The Land Development Agency has been set up by the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government to ensure the optimal use of state land. 4 new funds have been set up focused on urban and rural development, climate action and disruptive technology to prioritise funding to the best projects. These are managed by the relevant line departments. And the objective here was to ensure an element of competitive tendering within the system to try bring forward the best projects as early as possible for funding. A construction sector group is established to ensure regular and ongoing dialogue between government and the construction sector. And this was a criticism of in the past, that while the construction sector is delivering projects on behalf of the state, that we didn't have proper channels of communication. We now have a group which meets where we discuss issues around procurement, capacity, skills issues that impact upon the sector's ability to deliver on behalf of the government and the taxpayer. A Project Ireland board has been put in place and meets regularly to overview the overall implementation of the plan. The Investment Projects and Programmes Office has been established in my department to coordinate reporting on Project Ireland and to drive reforms, including strengthened business case and project appraisal. A capital projects tracker is published on the DEPR website to inform citizens of the variety of projects being rolled out in their area and to give a greater overview to the construction and infrastructure sectors. This tracker is currently being updated. A capability and capacity review of public sector bodies is now being commenced by DEPR to ensure that the state's delivery practices are to the highest standard. And there's always been a concern, Chair, that capacity varies across different elements of the public sector. And we understand that and appreciate that. And we're now going to take a review to ensure that all bodies charged with implementing the plan have the necessary expertise and skills to do that. As part of the ongoing reforms of Ireland's capital management system, the Office of Government Procurement is conducting a review of construction procurement strategy, and my department is reviewing the public spending code. The purpose of these reviews is to strengthen the existing guidance to better align with the realities of project delivery and with a particular focus on improved financial appraisal, cost estimation and management. In line with the public spending code provisions, the Government is the sanctioning authority for the National Paediatric Hospital, and the day-to-day oversight functions of the sanctioning authority are the responsibility of the Department of Health. My department's role in that project involves setting out the overall 5-year capital envelope, ceilings for health, and settle on the annual basis on how these multi-annual ceilings are reflected and refined in the annual estimate submitted to the Office for its approval. Decisions on which projects to invest in is responsibility of the Minister for Health and his department, in line with the delegated sanction for overall capital expenditure. Monitoring actual spend against monthly profiles based on information submitted to DEPR's vote, so as to keep track of aggregate spend by each department compared to planned spend. And we maintain the national frameworks within which departments operate to ensure appropriate accounting for and value for money, such as the Public Financial Procedures and the Public Spending Code. Responsibility for compliance with these national frameworks is a matter for the relevant accounting officer, who is the Secretary General of the Department of Health in respect of this project. The committee will be aware that the OGP is a division of my department. OGP leads on the implementation of the government's procurement reform programme. It provides procurement solutions, advice, guidance and systems for public bodies, promoting good practice and proactive engagement with our sourcing partners in health, education, defence, local government sectors through the procurement executive. It also has responsibility for developing and setting out the overarching policy framework for public procurement in Ireland. This framework enables a more strategic, consistent and coordinated approach to public procurement across the public sector by setting out the public procedures to be followed. Public works procurement is covered by the Capital Works Management Framework. This consists of a suite of best practice guidance, standard contracts and generic template documents. It is mandatory for use on all projects delivered under the Exchequer-funded element of the Public Capital Programme. The CWMF is maintained by the Construction Policy Unit of the OGP in consultation with the Government Contracts Committee for Construction, and David O'Brien, who's with me today, is the chair of that committee. The OGP has no direct involvement in works procurement, with the exception of the framework for rapid build social housing. Capital works are procured directly by the many public bodies tasked with delivery of the National Capital Programme. In relation to the paediatric hospital, the responsibility for day-to-day oversight is the Department of Health. The role of the Government Contracts Committee for Construction in this instance was to consider a request for a derogation by the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board from the use of the standard forms of contract. This request for a derogation may be used for complex or large projects which have a specific requirement which do not naturally fit with the standard lump sum contracts. And since 2011, Chair, there have been 12 derogations from the lump sum contract. Not all of them have been to the two-stage process that was used in relation to the Children's Hospital. There are other forms. So it's unusual, but it's not unique that derogations are sought and are given. The derogation acknowledged that the particular circumstances warrant a different approach. It does not approve the approach or strategy, and the responsibility for the procurement process rests with the contracting authority. Reform is part and parcel and a key element of Project Ireland, but we also have to learn from experience, both positive and negative. There is no doubt the experience of delivering capital works in recent years highlights the need to step up the pace of reform still further. The delivery of large, complex, multi-year capital projects in construction market, which is impacted by a short economic cycle, brings many challenges in terms of price volatility, skills shortages, etc. This is why the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform has recently set out a further suite of reforms in this area. So we need more certainty on project costs. Government will no longer commit to major bespoke projects until there is clarity on tendered costs. The Government will approve major projects to be evaluated and designed, but there will be no final commitment until after the tendering process is complete. It is not possible to know the price of a capital project with a high level of certainty until there is full design specification, planning if necessary has been achieved, and the project has been competitively tendered. In future, Government will not commit to projects until the design and price are clear. This could delay projects, Chair, and this will lead to commentary and angst about the delay, but it will ensure greater cost certainty. And there is a trade-off between speed of delivery and cost certainty when it comes to particularly for large complex projects. We need more realistic costs and a better understanding of costs in capital projects. In future, the budgets of large bespoke projects will include a significant premium for risk so that cost estimates are more realistic. As risk is managed through the project cycle, the risk premium will reduce. For example, a project on a brownfield site with a high degree of complexity, which has not been fully designed, would have a higher risk premium incorporated into its budget. As the risk is managed, the premium should reduce. And clearly for a standard project, whether it's a school or a primary care centre or a road where we have lots of experience of building similar type projects, the risk premium would be commensurately lower when compared with a larger once-off bespoke type project. The revised Capital Works Management Framework will require departments and their agencies to improve the quality of information on projects as they are implemented. This will improve decisions on projects and allow projects to use digital technologies such as the building information modelling to improve how efficiently they are delivered. And as part of the reviews of our capital management system, my department will conduct a full assessment of how cost estimation for projects could be improved. This will include exploring the potential for external peer review of cost estimates for projects over a certain size. We need to strengthen, in addition, our capital management systems. As I mentioned, we are reviewing our management system. The Office of Government Procurement is conducting a review of construction strategy, and we are reviewing the Public Spending Code. The purpose of these reviews is to examine how capital projects are currently selected, designed, delivered, and to strengthen these processes, take into account lessons from a range of projects that have been completed. This review will result, no doubt, in a number of changes, and there's two that I'd like to flag at this stage, if I may, Chair. One would be the earlier identification of projects. At present, departments are typically presented with projects which are fully formed or where the delivery method and project roles and responsibilities have been set. We believe that projects that departments should engage at an earlier stage to have more input into roles and responsibilities, delivery method, identification of risks and costs of that process, particularly with larger projects, to happen earlier in the life cycle. Secondly, a number of high-profile projects have highlighted issues with the performance of advisory firms. We propose to link payments to advisory firms to clear performance standards. In future, we will bring in performance standards linked to payments with those firms. So in conclusion, Chair, I hope I've set out our department's role in relation to the Children's Hospital. And I've set out a briefing which I hope helps the committee, and very happy to engage this afternoon on any questions members may have.
Thanks, Mr. Watt. Deputy McGrath. And I'd ask members to stick to the agreement of 10 minutes, please.
Sure. Thanks very much, Chair. You're very welcome, Mr. Watt, and all of your officials. And can I ask you, at this stage, have you got to the bottom, from your perspective, of what went wrong in relation to the Children's Hospital? A confirmed overrun of €450 million, and perhaps an awful lot more yet to come. So I think what people want to know is what went wrong, and can you give a clear answer on that?
I think from the discussions that have taken place in other Dáil committees and the public debate about this, Deputy, I think it's pretty clear what went wrong in relation to this project. We adopted a two-stage process which involved significant preliminary expenditure, €200 million on preliminary works, and a commitment to design, to finalise the design, to move to phase 2 of the project. There was a view at that stage of the first element, phase 1 of the contract being signed, that there was certainty about the approximate bill of quantities. That didn't turn out to be the case, that the estimates of how certain we were in relation to the bill of quantities was not correct, and the bill of quantities have increased very significantly compared to what was included in the project. So when you look at the government decision in spring 2017 to where we are now, the cost increase, the reasons for that, I think, are set out very, very clearly. Most of it relates to remeasurement of the bill of quantities. There are issues in relation to some design scope creep. There is issues in relation to value engineering savings that weren't delivered, and other matters. But I think the Mazars report and other discussions, I think, have set out very clearly the reasons for the increase in cost or prospective costs. From our perspective, we are working through what that means, Deputy, for future procurement. That's really what I've been trying to set out today, in terms of not committing to projects until we have absolute certainty about costs, and ensuring that we have detailed designs which form the basis for any cost.
But are you saying that the biggest problem was the fact that it was a two-stage process, or the fact that the design brief and the detailed specification was not nailed down prior to the sanctioning of the project?
It wasn't necessarily that it was a two-stage I don't think necessarily a two-stage process in itself can lead to these type of difficulties, but the way in which this two-stage process was implemented and was rolled out, in effect, led to the difficulties, because there was a contract signed with an outline design, and we were given, we were led to believe that there was certainty around those approximate bill of quantities. That we were told that there might be some variation, but we were given a view that when the preliminary works and the first contract was signed, there was reasonable certainty about the bill of quantities, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And then the government was left in a position, I think this is where it's critical in relation to the expenditure that we're committed to. In effect, we committed to significant expenditure until we actually knew the final cost. We thought we knew the final cost, but that wasn't true. And that's something we're saying shouldn't happen in the future, that we should not commit until we have a very detailed design, which has been competitively tendered, and then we know exactly how much.
But are you saying, in essence, that the government, in signing off in April 2017 of a figure of €983 million, that really the basis of that figure did not have a solid foundation, that was based on quicksand? I mean, that was a very rough estimate, because the detailed design was not done.
There wasn't a detailed design, there was an outline design, and we were given estimates of the certainty around the bill of quantities, which turned out not to be correct. I know that's a matter now which the PwC report are going to look into more
so
detail.
The issue is the outline design did not transpire to be close to the final design, and the bill of quantities was widely inaccurate.
I think it was the bill of quantities based on the design was inaccurate. There was a reasonable level of design, but it wasn't the final design, clearly, because the nature of the contract was that further design work was going to be done. But it was the estimation of the bill of quantities was fundamentally wrong.
That was the main issue.
Yes. But I think that's Dave will confirm that's the case. But I think it's set out in the Mazars report and other information that's been given to other committees by the relevant accounting.
And what's your sense now of what the final bill will be?
So I go on the basis of what we've been told by the sanctioning authority. So I have nothing further to add to what they've said.
1.433 for construction. And then when you look at the potential for that to rise further, there are a number of issues identified, one of which is construction inflation.
Yeah.
And any inflation above 4%, as per the average of 3 published tender price indices, which may occur post-July 2019, essentially has to be compensated back to the contractor. Have you scoped that out as to what that potentially could be? We had the OPW in here a few weeks ago, and they said that in practice, on the ground, construction inflation, they're finding in delivering their projects, is running at double digits, 11–12% is what they said. So, I mean, can you tell me, for every 1% above 4%, what is the extra cost of delivering this project?
So, I think, that's obviously speculation as to what the future inflation will be. We don't know what it is. The contract is very clear in what it says. And you're right, Deputy, in terms of your interpretation of the contract. That's absolutely certain. What percentage of the 900 or the billion, how much of that is related exactly to that particular inflation? I'm not sure, but I'm sure that the Department of Health can provide us with the numbers on what that means.
Okay, so just on that very question of what monetary sum
it may not cover, it may not cover
the
entire. It may not cover the entire
Yeah.
the 1.4. It's elements of that 1.4 where this contract would.
Okay, and then another risk the board has identified is the industry-wide sectoral employment order introduced in 2017. So is that not fully priced into the contract at this stage?
Yeah, yes, should be. Yeah.
But why? Like I have parliamentary reply here. It says the board has also identified as a potential risk the industry-wide sectoral employment order introduced in 2017.
We don't allow under any contracts for contractors to recoup increase in wages arising from changes to the employment order. It's not just in relation to this project, it happens across other projects as well. And that's a long-standing dispute between ourselves and our CIF friends in relation to pricing of contracts.
When did you and when did your department find out about the cost overrun?
So we received a document on November 19th November of last year.
Was that the very first that you, as head of the Department of Public Expenditure, heard of this very significant emerging increase in costs?
So the minister was told at a meeting on, I think the minister has confirmed this, on
the 9th, he said,
November,
the 9th
I think it was
of
a Friday, and the minister spoke to me. I wasn't in attendance at the meeting, but he spoke to me that weekend or Monday, whenever it was, about the meeting. So I knew there was an issue. We then sought Deputy.
So you knew from November, is it?
So the minister, I think, is confirmed November 9th. The minister said.
Yeah.
So he was told at a meeting that there was an issue. The minister called me about it. I said, okay, I will speak with officials the following week. There were discussions taking place. Like, we had asked for a detailed report, and so we said we need a report to see. And we got a report on the 19th, and our colleagues sat down on the 23rd of November, and we gave a detailed submission to the minister a few days later, setting out chapter and verse exactly what the position was.
But can you tell me why you would not have been told earlier? So we have the report from the 27th of August, which went to the Department of Health, confirming at that stage that there was an overrun of 191 million and that BAM had served notice of an extra charge of about 200 million. So that was being disputed, but 191 million was confirmed at that point in late August 2018. So why would that information not make its way to the Department of Public Expenditure?
That wasn't the end of the matter, as we now know. That wasn't the end of the matter.
It ended up higher, yeah.
So I think the Department of Health has dealt with this already. They were working through the costings. They were getting to the bottom of this issue. When it was raised with us then in November about the significant issue that had arisen, we sought a detailed report, which they presented with us. We met with them, and then we presented a detailed analysis to the Minister, which I think is on the record, and I think the timeline has been well discussed already.
Yeah, but like what I'm not hearing from you is that there was any failing here. I mean, looking at this report, which is late August, it says, as a result, the current construction budget is estimated to be €191 million over the value notified to government in April 2017. So, you know, that is from the HSE, that is the Department of Health. At that point, their estimate of the overrun, and then details of the extra €200 million, the additional cost claim from BAM at that point. And is there nothing wrong with that not being conveyed to the Minister for Public Expenditure and the Department?
I'm not suggesting for one moment that there weren't failings in the management of this project, and I haven't said that in my statement at all. Of course, nobody's happy with a situation where...
You haven't said that there were either.
I said there are lessons to be learned from what happened in relation to this project and other projects. Clearly, it's not a satisfactory situation that the government were told that a project in spring of 2017 would cost X, and then it transpires, Deputy, that it's going to cost significantly more than that. That's obviously not satisfactory, and that is something that nobody is happy with. All I can say to you is that based on the information that I received when we were notified of this, and I don't go, and nor do you, I'm sure anybody in this committee, goes on the basis of if somebody tells you there's a problem, a serious problem, or an issue, which the Minister was told, and he told my officials, he told me, we asked for a report, because that's what you have to do. It doesn't have to be a long report, it can be a page saying the position is X, and on foot of that report, we then, colleagues in the relevant section of the Department, met the Department of Health, and we prepared a detailed submission from Minister Donoghue, and that's when
See, I just don't think that people in the real world really understand that. I mean, there were issues emerging from late 2017 in relation to costs. Concerns were being expressed, and it was confirmed in August 2018. It's €191 million over budget, and BAM are looking for an extra €200 million. And the Department of Public Expenditure isn't told about that until November. That's just extraordinary. Do you agree?
No, I've set out the position that colleagues in the Department of Health were trying to establish exactly what the position was, and they brought that to the Minister, and then we sought a detailed report and had a conversation then.
Final question, just in relation to the multi-annual capital expenditure ceilings.
Yeah.
So I think the Government on the 18th of December 2018 approved the final contract, 1.433 billion. And the following day, revised estimates were issued. But as far as I can see, the estimates that were issued on budget day in October 2018 and again on the 19th of December did not take account of the increased costs of delivering the National Children's Hospital. So why was that?
So the summary estimates were prepared, as you know, on budget night, as is customary. There are always changes. The last number of years, those changes tend to be of a technical nature, not of a significant policy nature. In the past, there used to be very significant policy changes that would add hundreds of millions to the summary REV, the abridged REV, and then the final revised REV. But now we have technical adjustments, and I think this year there were 40, 50 million. Dave will confirm if I'm wrong, but there's a small amount of money in the overall scheme of things. So we realised then that for the Children's Hospital to proceed and for the government to make that decision, there needed to be more money for the hospital in the allocation for the Department 2019. We hadn't, by the time we published the REV, and we're anxious to publish the REV, and as you know, Deputy, there are lots of moving parts of this, like it's a very detailed document. Yeah. We were anxious to publish it, and the time frame didn't allow for us to get the government decision, not only in relation to Children's Hospital, but also the implications would be then for other votes, because the Minister took a view, the government took a view, there had to be reallocation.
But is it not the case, is it not the case that if you had the full information on budget day, the capital estimates that you published on that day would have been different? If you had the information that the Department of Health and the HSE had at that point, your estimates would have been different.
Well, if we have absolutely full information that to deliver something, whether it's child benefit, tax change, anything else for that matter, of course, in my experience, we don't prepare estimates that are fraudulent. There's one case in the state in the last 40 years where a fraudulent estimate was delivered to the Dáil, and I won't bore you with all the history of that. Well, it happened a long time ago. I don't recall in recent past that ever happening. In relation to any measure, ourselves in the Department of Finance set out very clearly, as you know, Deputy, because you were there respond to the budget on the day, we set out very clearly the cost of every single change, and that's incorporated in the estimates. On this occasion, we would have preferred to ensure that the impact of the decision in relation to the hospital and any allocation for other spending profiles was incorporated into the estimates, but we didn't allow because of the time frame. And there was a discussion about that, should we delay the REV, but the decision was taken that we should because the government had made the final decision, which would impact upon each element of the REV.
Thanks, Chair.
Deputy McGrath, Deputy Doherty.
Thank you and welcome to the committee. I think just from the outset, I think it's important to say, Mr. Watt, that the committee asked you to attend. I think we wrote to you on 3 times in February, and we welcome your attendance here, but we also asked specifically for Mr. Paul Quinn to be before the committee. Can you inform the committee why Mr. Quinn isn't here and why he hasn't accompanied some of the other officials, given that he was the only other person that we asked to appear before us?
So, like, I've had the opportunity, thank you, Deb, good to see you. I've had the opportunity to go to many committees, and I've been doing this in this role for a number of years. It's always been my understanding that it's up to the accounting official, the accountable person. I'm not the accounting officer here today, of course, but I am the accountable person, the lead person of the department. I take responsibility for the department, actions within the department. I take responsibility, and I'll here today with my colleagues try to answer all your questions that you put, and if not, we can come back to them through written procedure. So it's my decision in terms of who comes here. In relation to procurement, the key issue in relation to procurement in relation to this matter was the derogation from the standard form in the context of the Contracts Committee. David is the chair of the Contracts Committee, and David is here to answer any detailed questions deputies have in relation to that. I understand that Paul, in his capacity as a member of the board, will be appearing in front of an Oireachtas committee in the context of his membership of the National Children's Board.
Okay, I appreciate that. Can we maybe just to finish this line, do you believe that the Oireachtas committee has the right to question a senior official within the Department of Public Expenditure if it so agrees or so requests?
So, like, I think people have a right to set out that we'd like to talk about the following issues, and that letter was addressed to me. I've sent detailed notes, detailed submission to the chair, response to each of the questions that were put, and I'll answer clarifications around those today. So I think it's up to the official responsible, the accountable person, to lead and to be here to represent the department and to explain our role in relation to this matter. The official in respect of this, Paul Quinn, doesn't have any function in respect of this matter as an officer of this department. He has a role in respect as a member of the board and not as an officer of the department. I know that sort of Jesuitical distinction is not necessarily uttermost in people's minds when they're debating. That's the reality of it. Paul doesn't have a role when it comes to discharging of his functions in the department in relation to this matter. David does, and other colleagues here have a role with me. So it was my judgment call, Deputy. I'm here. I spent 4 hours at the PAC this morning answering questions. I have sent in a detailed note. I've set out issues here in the presentation. I'm here to answer questions. So,
we appreciate you're here, but probably it was our judgment call collectively as elected members of the Oireachtas Committee and as members of the Joint Committee on Finance that Mr. Paul Quinn, the Chief Procurement Officer in the Department of Public Expenditure, which is the line department of this committee, should appear before us, and that's why on 3 separate occasions we asked that he present. Now, you've decided that our judgment isn't the right judgment, and you've decided that Mr. Paul Quinn shouldn't attend. Is that?
Look, I don't think it's appropriate for me to get into an argument with you about this. I don't think that's my role. There are many issues in relation to Dáil's procedures and operations over the last 8 weeks that I'm very unhappy with, and frankly very disappointed with. I'm not going to come here today complaining about that. I've received over 30 pieces of correspondence from 4 committees. I've been criticised unfairly for non-attendance of committees, which is untrue on many occasions by many deputies. And my colleague Paul Quinn, who's an excellent official who discharges his functions diligently on behalf of the state, has been unfairly criticised, Deputy. I'm not going to make a big fuss about that. I'm not going to get into an argument about it. I'm here to talk about the issues which I'm responsible. I'm very happy to answer questions which are relevant to the discharge of my functions as best I can. If there are issues that we can't deal with today, in the normal course of event, I will correspond with the chair if that's what deputies wish.
Given the current costs of the National Children's Hospital, do you believe that it is value for money?
So I think there are 2 aspects to value for money. There's obviously the cost element of it, and then there's the value of the new hospital. So what value do any of us put on the new hospital? So we have 3 hospitals at the moment. Nobody is satisfied with the conditions of these facilities. I was in Temple Street a few weeks ago myself. I know deputies are aware from their own personal experience, family experience, or experience of their constituents, that the current facilities we have for paediatric care in the country are not adequate, and that's why everybody supports the Children's Hospital. So there's a value on that. Nobody here in this room, nobody in my department, nobody knows what the value is of this new facility. Obviously, the cost is higher than we would have hoped, higher than we thought was going to be the case, and judgment call has to be made. The government made a judgment call in December that will proceed with this Children's Hospital, even though the costs, as outlined to Deputy McGrath, are greater than was anticipated. And the government made a decision that even with that cost, that the benefits and the importance of this facility are such that they would, on behalf of the taxpayer, proceed with this facility. Issues around value for money, what represent values for money, nobody can put a value on, facilities. So objectively, that's the decision. But am I convinced that everybody here will be very happy we have this new facility built? I think they will be, yes.
Yeah, look, we all want a National Children's Hospital. We all want the best facilities, particularly for our children. And unfortunately, I've had reasons to attend both Temple Street and Crumlin Hospital. We know the situation for them. Yep. But the idea that nobody can put a value on this, this is one of the central roles of your department, and you're the General Secretary. Value for money is a key role in relation to your role and responsibility. So to dismiss the idea that nobody can put a value on this, it's a core element of the Department of Public Expenditure.
If you're asking me, do I think? Yes, I think over time people will conclude when this hospital is built, and even though it will be very expensive, and it is very expensive, that over time future generations will say, yes, this was money that's well spent and it's providing a world-class facility for our citizens.
The board adopted the fast-track two-stage tender procurement model. Did DPER have a role in regard to authorising that model or signing off on it?
So a derogation was sought at the Government Contracts Committee, of which David is the chair. So in normal course of event, projects are tendered on a lump sum basis. So there's a standard contract form that we use. On this occasion, the National Children's Hospital, the board, came to the Contracts Committee over a number of years and debated the merits and feasibility of the existing approach versus the other approaches. After those debates, derogation was sought from the lump sum contract, and they proceeded then on the phase two, the two-phase basis on that. So a derogation was sought. It's not for the Contracts Committee to approve that, it's not for my department to approve it, but they did seek a derogation, they were awarded derogation, and then it's the responsibility of the sanctioning authority to satisfy themselves that the procurement approach and strategy is the appropriate one to adopt.
But does the Contracts Committee have to look at the issues such as, is this the appropriate type of approach before they would approve?
So they don't approve it, but they would seek a derogation from the existing form. Yes, they would have to be satisfied.
They approve the derogation.
They approve the derogation. Yes.
Yeah. And they would have to satisfy themselves that this would be the best course of action.
Yes.
And this falls within the Department of Public Expenditure.
This falls within the remit of the Construction Committee, the Government Contracts Committee, the GCCC,
which is under the department. We have a lot of department.
It's a body within. David chairs it. It's a body in the department. It's a consultative forum of the main sanctioning authorities. So the procuring officers, in effect, the sanctioning authorities across the public service, sit and meet, and they discuss evolution of contracts, how contracts are evolving, relationship with the sector, and it's a forum for debates of this nature take place. And they do have a responsibility ultimately for, if a contracting authority seeks a derogation from the standard form, they have to get that approval from. And as I mentioned, we've had 12 derogations since 2011. Not all of them have been to a two-phase process. Other contract forms have been used. But that, in effect, Deputy, is a position, yes.
It's only public servants that are on this forum, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you accept that the approval of that derogation was one of the reasons why we are seeing such massive overruns in the National Children's Hospital?
So I think there are two issues here. It's not entirely clear what the counterfactual would have been. If we'd adopted a lump sum contract, it's not clear that the hospital would have been cheaper. It might have taken us longer to get to the price, and it wouldn't have been described as an overrun versus the position that was set out at phase one. So the counterfactual is not clear, and this I think is an important issue, Deputy, that nobody can say, and we're not convinced, that a different approach would have necessarily yielded a different result. Certainly a different approach would have ensured the project didn't evolve as it has done, and with element of the final cost being characterised as an overrun. I would think that the implementation of the two-stage process. On this occasion, in my view, there were mistakes with it. I think there are two issues. Firstly, to commit significant spending on preliminary works, and then to say, well, the government could still, at some future date, opt out when it gets to the maximum price. I don't think that's actually really credible. I think
is that not what the two-stage project is about?
In this instance it was, yes, but it doesn't have to be
but
like this.
Is that not what the body under your department sanctioned?
So just if I can finish the question, so there's two elements here. There's the fact that significant spending was incurred on the preliminary works. And secondly, we were given guarantees in relation to the approximate bill of quantities. 95% certainty was the number that was used, and that didn't turn out to be the case. So the fact that the bill of quantities was wrong meant that when the final tender price came out, it was significantly above what the government was told the price would be, and the fact that we'd committed significant spending on preliminary works made it very difficult for that stage for the government to call a halt, and the costs of retendering and so on would have led to a situation perhaps where the alternatives would be more expensive than continuing with the two-stage process. So I don't think per se the two-stage process in all cases is the wrong approach, but I think the lessons, and that's what I tried to set out in my opening remarks, I think there are two lessons about committing significant spending on preliminary works while still saying that the government has an option to opt out. I'm not sure that's actually credible, to be honest. It's only credible if, of course, if the guaranteed final price is in line with the price that was set. Okay. But the bill of quantities was obviously misspecified.
But when the Constructions Committee met, they were aware that that was the model that was being followed, that there would have been significant public money spent on the preliminary work, and at a later stage there would be a second piece of work which, in theory, the government could opt out of it, but in practice the developer had the government over a barrel.
But their understanding was that the bill of quantities was an approximate bill of quantities, that it was 95% specified. So there would have been a risk of more spending, absolutely, but not on the scale that we have seen. So they committed to preliminary works on the basis of a final tender price, which the guaranteed maximum price, which was close to the price set out in the memo in spring 2017.
What due diligence does this expert committee in terms of
it's a question
take in terms of the bill of quantities? Because the bill of quantities wasn't just a bit out.
So it's the responsibility of the National Children's Hospital, it's the responsibility of the sponsoring agency and the sanctioning authority to be satisfied. And they gave assurances to the Contracts Committee in relation to the bill of quantities, and that was part of one of the inputs which led them to seek a derogation on this occasion.
Let me go back to with some of the questions that was asked earlier on. We had a scenario where it was clear, was it the General Secretary of the Department of Health and the Minister of Health was made aware of at late August that there was a €191 million overrun that was going to develop, and a potential figure of 200 million in addition to that. In your view, as General Secretary of the Department of Public Expenditure, should that information have been relayed to you at that point in time, given the work that you would be doing on the budget?
As I understand it, Deputy, and I'm not involved in the National Children's Board, I'm not the Secretary General responsible for this project, as you know, but my understanding is that number was a number that was put on the table by BAM, and that number then fell from 191 to 50. So it was so the August information, if that's the right way to describe that data point as information, that didn't turn out to be the case. There were other reasons then, other factors then.
I think maybe you might be getting the numbers mixed up. The 191 was crystallised at that point in time.
So was the other 200 million.
There was another 200 million that actually.
So the other 200 million was
the point, and just in case you didn't understand, is that what was aware at that time by the Minister for Health, and I understand the General Secretary of the Department, was that there was a crystallisation of 191 million and potentially something above that, but that wasn't relayed to yourselves.
But I just think the point about the potential, of course, that issue that was in dispute, that dispute was settled. That number came down quite dramatically.
So but the other number didn't. The 191 stayed the same. Should that information have been relayed to you?
So I think this is. I think this has been discussed. The ministers have given their views here, and I have nothing further to add to what they've said.
Well, I want to know. And see, the problem is, whatever's happened in the National Children's Hospital, it's happened. You know, so. And we need to find a way, if possible, to drive down the costs while delivering the project in a timely manner. But you're the General Secretary of the Department of Public Expenditure. I want to have confidence that I know that the General Secretary sitting across the table from me believes that in the course of developing a budget for 2019, that he thinks that if a General Secretary knows that there's 191 million of a potential overspend in another project, that you should be aware of it. Yeah, I'll come to a conclusion.
Like that's a matter for the Department of Health in terms of when they were getting to the bottom of this and when they communicated it to us. That's a matter for them.
Do you think it was appropriate for them not to tell you at that point in time of the...
This matter has been discussed. There's nothing I can say here that's going to...
Actually, Mr. Watt, this is the first time you've been before the committee in relation to this.
This committee.
This is us discussing it.
This committee.
This is us discussing it.
I'm
not on the other committee. This is us discussing. I don't know if they've asked this question of you earlier on. And
yes, they did. Yeah.
Did you give an answer to them?
I gave an answer, the same answer I've given to you.
Okay. Okay. Can I ask you, it appears from what your opening statement is that really this is nothing to do with the Department of Public Expenditure,
didn't say that.
No, I'm just laying it out. That the sanctioned body was the government and the appropriate department was the Department of Health. We see from minutes that have been released, for example, that the Department of Health was looking to meet with the Department of Public Expenditure officials for quite a number of weeks to discuss this issue. That meeting didn't take place and only took place at a later stage after the Minister was alerted of the overruns. I see in terms of one of the correspondence from Barry O'Brien to Tracy Conroy in the Health Department, and it basically says we've received nothing from the Department of Health that considers total costs, where the overall costs of the project now stand, asking questions about what about the other non-construction costs that amount to 300 million, will that increase? And asking, are we now looking at a project that will cost over 2 billion, which would make it the most expensive hospital in the world? It appears from both the content of this email and the tone of the email that the Department of Public Expenditure were put out at the fact that they were not informed in relation to this. They do acknowledge that there was some discussions at budget times in relation to this, but no detail. Is it the case, in your view, that if any department is developing a project, whether that is a rail, a road, whether that is a sewage treatment plant of a major scale, and that the department is aware of a major overrun, that it is okay not to bring that to the attention of the Department of Public Expenditure?
So I think they did bring it to. I think they did bring it to our attention. They did bring it to our attention.
They brought it to your attention 3 months later, after the budget was passed.
They brought it to our attention a few weeks after the budget was passed, and a period after when they were trying to establish the facts.
And you think it's completely appropriate? Is it your view? Because let me be plain. If the General Secretary of the Department of Public Expenditure is telling this committee here, which is the Committee of Finance and Public Expenditure, that it's okay for a department to be aware of hundreds of millions of euro of an overrun.
Prospective overruns, yeah.
No, actually an overrun. 191 million of an overrun.
Prospective overrun on a project. Not actual overrun, prospective overrun.
An overrun that was crystallised, that was going to materialise if the project continued.
And if the government approved it subsequently.
And if the government approved it, yes. And not inform the Department of Public Expenditure, which was preparing estimates to go before the House of the Oireachtas.
So the department were getting to the bottom of the cost issue, and I think that's very clear from the correspondence, the minutes and so on that you've seen and that people have quoted, and that when they were in a position to talk with us, this was brought to the attention of our Minister. We saw the detailed report. I think 4 days after that report we sat down with them, and then a few days after that again the Minister received a very detailed report from our team with our assessment of the options that we needed to pursue. That's the timeline of what happened.
Thank you, and again, welcome to Mr. Watt and his staff. Can I just ask you, in terms of the budgetary process, the capital expenditure proposals, they are included as tables and information in the budget documentation. Is that correct?
Capital allocations in respect to projects that have been approved and that are proceeding with, and departments are going to spend money on schools, roads, whatever it happens to be, the money Deputy has set out in the allocations.
And would you
and budget.
accept that broadly people have confidence that that is the likely spending profile of Ireland as a country because it's in the budget documentation? It also gives an indication as well to markets of what the likely borrowing profile is going to be. In turn, that affects how cheaply or how expensively as a country we can borrow, depending on whether those estimates seem reasonable or unreasonable. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, so the capital profiles are set out, and they're a key component of the budget. For this year, it's almost $7.5 billion, $8 billion spent on exchequer capital, and that's included within the overall expenditure of the state of almost 70 billion and almost 80 billion in terms of general government. So clearly, that's a key element of the balance sheet of the state, or the balance sheet, but the accounts of the state for any given year. And that has an impact clearly on the underlying balance, the balance position, surplus deficit, and of course has implications then for how people look at the creditworthiness of the state. Yeah. Yes.
But do you understand that people who get the budget documentation, that could be parliamentarians, this committee here, it could be people in business and so on, that when we get the budget documentation, we don't expect it to be exactly correct because it is a forecast and people understand that. But the scale of change in relation to the Children's Hospital over what had been previously predicted, just a very short period after the budget, has genuinely stunned people. It's stunned people and it's worried them. And would you agree it has put a very big question mark over the competence of the Irish government and the Irish Public Service to produce reliable information on cost profiles?
So I think there are issues for us in how large-scale projects are managed, how we determine the costs of projects, and when we say to somebody, this is going to cost X, what is the basis for that cost? And my view, which I've set out in the note, Deputy, is that a cost for something only has meaning when the project is fully spec'd, set out in detail, and that has been tendered competitively in the marketplace. I think a lot of estimates before then are very general in nature, depending on particularly when it comes to once-off projects. When it comes to overall budget management and management of budgets, I'm very happy to defend the management of the public finances over the last number of years. When I was appointed to this role, the fiscal deficit was 15%. Our banking system was bust, our international reputation was in tatters, and we couldn't raise money on the financial markets. Unemployment is now 5%. We have a balanced budget. Our yields on 10-year money are 100 basis points, etc., etc. So I'm very happy to defend the role of our department and my colleagues in the Department of Finance in terms of managing our public finances. In relation to this issue, this is 100 million for 2019. In the context of this project, the overruns are clearly very, very significant, 40, 50, 60%, depending on which element of the budget you're talking about. 100 million in the context of the capital budget, which for 2019 is going up by 1.5 billion, and an overall capital budget of 8 billion, is not, like, if I use words like not material, or people will out there spin it as if I said that that's not significant. It is significant, but in the overall scheme of the size of the Irish state, it's a manageable amount of money. But just to say, and this is a general point about the capital plan, which deputies I know are aware of, but maybe it hasn't got enough publicity. The capital plan, by its nature, is an iterative plan. Like, there's a figure of 116 billion. It's set out there. There are a whole variety of projects which we're going to fund within that. How these projects are funded and the time frame for projects, like, you know this, Deputy, like, that school will be ready before that school. There'll be delays in that school. Another school will be prioritised. The same for primary health centres. The same for roads projects. So it's an iterative process involving many different actors, and it will evolve over time. And hopefully, if the economy continues to grow and prosper, we will have the resources to deliver all the commitments set out in the plan.
Would you agree, though, that your statement there would be shocking to an awful lot of people, that this is manageable, so really it doesn't matter that much.
I
And
didn't
we're
say- I didn't say-
concerning.
I
Sorry,
didn't
sorry.
say
Can
that.
I just
Didn't-
ask a
didn't say-
question?
didn't say- I just-
Can I ask a question?
But I just clarify, I didn't say that.
No, just hold on.
Put words on
Can
my-
I ask the question,
Didn't
please?
say that.
Can I ask the question? Does your department have a weekly MAC meeting, a management meeting of the department where you and all your civil servants, and I think on a lot of occasions, all the ministers connected to the department would sit down and they would go through all the pertinent financial issues and other issues related to the department? So the question I want to ask you is this. How many times, in terms of your MAC meeting, given that this is such, if you like, a significant prestige project in relation to Ireland on a European scale, and given that it's so important to the country as well, and so expensive at the old price, but also at the new price, bearing in mind as well that the site was being donated by an existing hospital, so they didn't even have to buy land. Can I ask you, how frequently did your MAC meeting discuss, in general terms, I wouldn't expect you to be going through the details, how frequently did you discuss the overall capital plan in the run-up to the budget, which I assume you must have discussed, and then the quality of that plan and the figures included in it, particularly very large projects like the Children's Hospital?
So we meet we meet once a week, the management board, for about an hour, where each member of the management team set out the issues for the week, and we run through legislation and what's happening in the Dáil and so forth. And we have a management forum every third or fourth week where we discuss things in more detail, policy issues that colleagues want to bring. The Minister sits in on the meetings once every 4 or 5 weeks, and the Minister will come along and he will discuss his priorities and check with colleagues about how we're getting on with his priorities. In relation to the capital plan, in the run-up to Project 2040, the capital plan, the discussions on that with the Minister and the Taoiseach and with the Government and with colleagues in different departments, that would have been on the agenda pretty much every week in the formulation of the plan, because it was a key part of what we were doing. In the run-up to the budget, we will be discussing every Monday morning progress of the budget in respect of current spending and overall capital spending. The main focus tends to be in relation to the larger budget, so most of the conversation will be in relation to social welfare package, will be in relation to current spending on health, medical cards and so on, and there'll be issues in relation to education and justice. But most of the time, as you know from your own time, Deputy, is on the larger spending departments. In the run-up to the budget, there wasn't a significant discussion on capital spending, because capital spending is in effect locked down in the main, because we have a multi-annual approach to capital spending. We've got 5 years plans and we've got a 10-year plan.
But in this case it wasn't locked down,
because
it was wrong.
Well, it was locked down in relation to the 2019 allocation at the time we were setting out the budget. But there were discussions, of course, about capital allocations. You'll find, though, that the adjustment to the capital envelope for 19 compared to what would have been in previous documentation in respect of the allocation for 19, I don't think there would have been significant differences. There was more money put in for housing, I think over 100 million. There are various issues in relation to service sites and so on as part of the negotiations, and there are other issues, but I don't think the capital allocation was actually very different from what we expected to be some months before the budget discussions took place.
Can I just ask you...
Discussed every week.
Sorry. Can I ask you...
Capital was discussed, Deputy, but it wasn't discussed... when it comes to discussions on the budget, and particularly from the September to October period, given that most of the capital decisions are bedded down and taken, most of the conversation takes place in relation to other matters. Yeah, but look, that, you know.
Can I ask you two further questions? The first one is this. Given the size and the scale of this budget, this particular project, there would appear to be relatively few contractors in Ireland who can contract for this scale of project. Can you tell me, because it seems to me that the contractors seem to be able to call the shots on variations? I know, and you've told us already, they will have to prove them. But is there in effect a cartel in operation among a chosen group of contractors? Because the Taoiseach last week was in Lisbon, and in the context of Lisbon, I had a look at the projects in Portugal in relation to building hospitals. There's one that's being built at the moment, and it's 875 rooms, a lot bigger than our children's hospital, and it is expected to come in at 330 million, so say under 400 million. Did you and your department, or on your behalf the people in health, did they have a look at comparative costings of hospitals in different parts of the world? When this project was originally mooted, I certainly did that. I visited children's hospitals any time I went abroad for St. Patrick's Day in the different parts of the states I went to. And all I can say is that this hospital has been stunningly expensive. You still haven't explained to us. You did say a brownfield site. So just let's say brownfield site added 10 or 15% roughly to the cost. And I'm prepared to accept that. Can you please just explain to us, now or later, on behalf of taxpayers, how did it come out so incredibly wrong? And is there some kind of a cartel in operation where people are pitching at particular prices, but those prices, if you like, are a first, you use the term, I think, guesstimate, and basically the chosen contractors it then gets inflated upwards afterwards. And how does that happen in Ireland? But in other countries, similar projects are coming in much more cheaply. And I know in other countries wage costs may not be exactly the same, but even in places like California, hospital costs are coming in cheaper than they are here. The second question that I wanted to ask you in the same vein was, you're aware, and I know you're aware, of the Section 38 and 39 institutions who rely on capital funding from the state, and I'm talking particularly here about, for instance, hospice development right around the country. Now, if you're involved, and I know you're aware of this, in a voluntary project to build a hospice for any county or two counties in Ireland, you have a huge amount of voluntary fundraising, right? You know about the one in Blanchardstown down the years, and at the end, the state comes in and tops up to finish off the development and allow the hospice to open. You just said now 100 million manageable, right? But what is going to happen to the Section 38 and 39 organisations this year who are in for capital funding? I mean, the 100 million is an awful lot in terms of their different projects, and that's just in the health area alone. Can you tell me that no hospice in the country will be delayed in terms of funding? Or where will the 100 million? We've heard from the Taoiseach and a range of ministers, it's 3 million of this, it's 3 million of that, in a range of departments. But in terms of health itself, which is offering up some of the reductions, what is going to happen to the Section 38 and 39 allocations?
Time is concluded. Mr. Watt.
Thanks, Deputy. I know more about Blanchardstown than I really want to know about, to be honest. I hear a lot of talk about Blanchardstown. And other matters in relation to Dublin West, as it turns out. Funnily enough, I am familiar with the issues in relation to Section 38, 39. There's a broader question there about their status and how their capital is funded, because they have to do more fundraising and they're not as they don't benefit from Exchequer funding projects as other bodies classified differently within the health system. And there's a wider policy question there which I'm not really mandated to go into. In relation to the small number of contractors, there is an issue about the depth of contractors in Ireland, particularly when it comes to larger projects. That's definitely the case, and that is something that we've been debating and discussing. Can we get more international players involved? Can we get more people looking at these projects? And part of what we're trying to do with Project 2040 is set out a pipeline of projects and to try to get some of those consulting teams and construction teams that left for the Middle East or Australia or Canada during the crash to come back. And that's something that we have been debating. But absolutely, Deputy, I agree with you. There is an issue. I wouldn't describe as a cartel because that's an illegal offence, and I don't think I'm covered by privilege here. But I'm not going to make any comment about that. But it's certainly the case that there's a small number of contractors who bid for these, and that would have implications for the competitive nature of any competition. Overall, though, in terms of, and I'm not in any way, and I think it's not fair to any way to suggest that I'm belittling the additional costs associated with this project. I'm not, and we've been very serious about it when we realised that there was an issue. The 100 million, the overall context, though, needs to be considered. But I don't think we should give the impression to taxpayers and citizens out there that there are no projects on time or on budget. In actual fact, the vast majority of projects are delivered through lump sum tender contracts, where the price actually comes below or at or slightly above where we tendered. The vast majority, primary schools, secondary schools, all the deputies here know more about this than I do, primary care centres, motorways, other roads. So I don't think it's fair to characterise that this situation with the children is a fair representation of the generality of project delivery in the state. What I think is absolutely fair is to learn the lessons from this project, and particularly the circumstances of dealing with large bespoke projects and the merits of different options. And I think that's our focus is on trying to ensure that the public spending code is reinforced, that procurement policy is reinforced, that we do all the things we possibly can to ensure that we get value for money for future projects. And this is not an excuse. This is not an excuse. But there's been some debate, if that's the right word. It's not debate. Chat that Dermot Bannon's kitchen extension wouldn't be dealt with this way. That comparison is absolutely and utterly facile. It is of no relevance to this discussion whatsoever. Well, I'm not saying you did. Other people.
You know some people who made that. Do they work in your department?
I do not. No,
because if they do,
but there's a debate
they
out
don't
there.
know much about
There's a
building.
debate. There's a debate. This hospital is 3 times bigger than Tala Hospital. The preliminary works involve moving the Drimnagh sewer, a significant part of our sewer system. I'm just giving a sense of the scale of it. It's not so. The point I'm making is that much of what we're doing well, and much of what we're doing has been delivered on time and on budget. But of course, there are big issues that we need to learn from what happened.
Thank you, Thank you for your opening statement. I have a correspondence here from your department to the Department of Health. It's dated on the 20th of November, and in it says, as you know, in the past we voiced serious concerns in relation to governance of the Children's Hospital project and were assured that the arrangements in place were sufficient and robust. What serious concerns did you have? And if you had serious concerns, what measures did you put in place to make sure that those concerns could be allayed?
So, between 2012 and spring of 2017, we had significant discussion with the Department of Health and the HSE in relation to this project, the optionality of this project, the costs involved, and critically the governance structure. And I think the emails, the correspondence, or at least the document, the timeline for those discussions have been set out in the public domain. So we raise issues around the governance of this because of the complexity of it, and we want to ensure that whoever was given responsibility for managing this, the sponsoring agency, had the necessary expertise, and that led to the decision to set up the Children's Board, which was full of people with very significant experience, most from the private sector, experience of dealing with large projects. Tom Costello, who chaired the board, worked, I think, for CISC for 30 years in Ireland and elsewhere, and other people on the board had a whole variety of qualifications that were relevant for this. So the discussions, we had discussions about governance, because we were concerned about governance. We wanted to make sure there was absolute clarity around what body was the sponsoring entity and what body was the sanctioning authority, and would manage the oversight of this on a daily basis on behalf of the government. So that's where our concerns, and we raise those concerns consistently. When the government memo, and I'm not allowed to talk about government memos because they're covered by other procedures, but the government memo of 2017, I think the Minister for Health and Secretary have set out the governance structure, and at that side we were satisfied that the governance structure could deliver this project. We had consistently raised issues around the cost long before my time. Like, this is a project that has been running for 20 years, 30 years. In 2012 we had the issue in relation to the Matter site, and then there was a decision which the Planning Commission was refused, and then we went back to the drawing board, and then I think it was Minister Riley at the time, he came forward then with a review of the different options, and it was decided that it would be co-located with James's and off and running. So we had significant issues about the cost of this project, issues around the project, how we manage given its scale, and we had made those comments known and those concerns known to the department, and they'd been set out in observations on memos consistently during that period.
Okay, so but you still didn't have a mechanism in place whereby overruns would be identified and reported to yourself as Director General of the Department of Expenditure?
So the procedure for spending is to relate the actual spending to the profile, and for us to be alert to any variance. This is different because it was prospective spending as opposed to actual spending. And I've already set out in relation to questions earlier about the two-stage process and how that was managed and how we got to this situation.
Did you think the two-stage process was the right one to do then? Did you stood over that, did you?
So, as I mentioned in relation to the questions earlier, the Government Construction Contracts Committee had a debate with the National Children's Board over a long period of time, 18 months, 2 years, David, where they discussed the merits of this approach. And a derogation was sought and a derogation was given to move away from the lump sum contract. But the lump sum contract, if the counterfactual, if the alternative to the two-stage process was the lump sum contract, it's not clear, and I don't think anybody in this room is saying it's clear, but it's not clear that we would have delivered this hospital faster or cheaper in a better way, which would have satisfied concerns that people now have. Like, it's not clear to my mind at that stage that, like, the lump sum contract, to say that we would have been in a position to set out the detailed design required to have a competitive competition for a lump sum contract, I just don't think that would have happened. I don't think we would have attracted contractors who would have been taken on board that risk.
So do you think
given the inevitable uncertainty around the two-stage process? Now, I think the issue here is about the way that two-stage process was managed. I don't think the decision for a two-stage process was a wrong decision, but I think there are issues in how that managed, and there are lessons that we know for the future. And there are other projects that have been developed, very significant projects for the state, where there will be very significant challenges in terms of finalising a design and when that design will be put to market.
But has the two-stage process been used for any other projects within this state?
So there have been there's the Dunkettle interchange is a two-stage process also.
And has that been successfully delivered?
I don't have the details. David, do you want to?
Sorry. It's
Starting it.
sorry, the mic. Do I turn it on? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there it is. The Dunkettle is an early contractor involvement, two-stage contract, but it's slightly different in that the works that are being undertaken are purely investigative works, and the contractor is engaged purely with their, if you like, their management and construction expertise to feed into the design and the de-risking of that particular project. So it's not exactly the same as the Children's Hospital, the approach.
Yeah.
So it's working to a GMP for the project, but there isn't works being undertaken as such at the moment.
You see, when you use a process and a methodology like that and it comes in with such a shocking overrun, surely it must say to you that this is the wrong model to be used. You know.
Yeah, no, look, certainly nobody is going to say that this has worked out. Nobody's going to say this has worked out according to plan. That's clearly not the case. This hasn't worked out. The government were given a view as to how much this would cost in spring 2017, and it's 400 million more now than the government were told. So clearly that's not tenable position. Well, the question though, and I'm not being in any way evasive here because we're having a debate and discussion, and I don't know the answer to this, but I don't think any of us should believe that an alternative lump sum contract or some variant of that would necessarily have built this project cheaper. That's what I'm saying. Maybe it would have done.
Do you think it might have been dearer then?
I just don't know.
Do you think it might have been more expensive than the most expensive hospital in the world?
I just don't. I think it's the second most expensive hospital in the world.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's what I'm told anyway. But I don't know that we can say with certainty that the counterfactual is necessarily better. I don't think we can say that.
What's the most expensive hospital in the world then?
That's one in Helsinki, was it? Stockholm. Thank you, David. Stockholm.
Stockholm.
Good man.
So are we using that as a measure of success?
No, I'm not,
That there's,
no,
there's one more expensive.
No, of course we're not. Of course we're not. No, but I'm like I think.
And how many beds does that have? The one in Helsinki? Is it the same number of beds?
I don't know. How many
Yeah.
beds.
Well, you see, you can't then. You can't. It is twice as many beds. Yeah.
Onto the Treasury in
You
Sweden.
can't. No,
But the point I'm making, though, Deputy, is that the point I'm
Yeah.
making, though, is that I don't think we can say that the two-stage process per se has led to this. The implementation of this particular two-stage process, of course, has led to these difficulties. And as far as I can see, there are two problems which I mentioned to Deputy Doherty. There are two issues: committing to significant preliminary works, which in fact then tie the government into completing a project on that site without us knowing the final tender. That's the issue. And secondly, that the approximate bill of quantities was not in any way consistent, ultimately what we were told it would be in spring 2017.
So who's responsible for that? I know you'd say the contractor again. See, for people looking, there's a couple of issues for them. Obviously, the governance, where you had serious concerns, not just concerns, not just kind of general governance observations, whatever, but serious concerns. And you have a number of people within your department who, look, solely just monitor the health budget and what's spent on health. And yet, nobody knew what was happening. And that's the worrying thing. So nobody in your department knew what was happening. Even though going back to the 20th of October, that in 2017, where you had the 40 million overrun, like 40 million is a lot of money in that instance. And nobody, how many people have you within your department that monitor health spending?
So we've many, not enough, it would seem, given our record, but so not enough. But so I think the issue is there was a significant debate, which I've set out, and I'm in danger of repeating myself here. Significant issues were raised repeatedly with the Department of Health in the run-up to the decision in 2017. It was our understanding that we had a final tender price which was going to be close to the final bill here, and that turned out not to be the case. And I've set out why I think that is, and David is the expert who will confirm this. We have to learn lessons from it, and it has implications for how we manage projects. Like Deputy, like I haven't spent the last 8 weeks in terms of longer since this issue came, amongst the other challenges that we face. You know, who did what, when, how. What I've been working with Minister, because that's what I was asked to do, is to set out what this means for the delivery of this facility, what it means for the capital allocations for next year.
But are you satisfied now?
And then see what issues does it mean for the public spending code and procurement. And what I've tried to do here, like I haven't come into this committee with my hands down on my side saying, oh, there's nothing to see here, there are no lessons, and there's nothing that I haven't said that. I've actually set out, and apologies, a long contribution to the issues that I think this raises for public policy. And these aren't in any way trivial issues. Like if we do things differently in the future, it means it's going to take us longer to do projects, because we're going to have to spend an awful lot more time and money in getting detailed designs, and we won't go through a process where we have this two-stage approach. So it does raise fundamental issues for us in terms of how we manage projects, which people here will be grappling with in the future, no doubt.
Yeah, but surely, surely the basic thing, like having the design right, so it can match up to the bill of quantities, like it's just so minor. Like, in the learning that you're talking about, the government will no longer pre-commit to major bespoke projects until it's 100% clarity on tendered costs. How can you tender for something?
So, like what we're saying in effect.
How can you put something out to tender when you don't know the design?
In the past, like clearly a lump sum contract, there's a very detailed design set out, and contractors will price it based on the detailed design. And what can happen, is that there's then an adversarial relationship, and there's a lot of discussion about price variation, where the contractor would say, oh, you said you wanted windows like that, or you want that number of windows. In actual fact, we needed X number of windows, and therefore we're going to argue that It wasn't us, it was the design. So there's endless discussions about the extent to which even the detailed design matches up with the ultimate requirements of the client, what's been delivered by the contractor. But what we are saying clearly is for the state, and it doesn't relate to building a school because they're the same, or a primary care, the things that we repeat time and time again, we know what we're doing. But when it comes to projects that are unique, we need to spend the learning from us here, and we're obviously here to advise the Minister and the Government, but our learning is that we need to spend much more time on the detailed design before we can commit that design to tender. And that will increase cost certainty, we believe, but it will come at a cost because it's going to take an awful lot more time and money to develop the detailed design, particularly for one-stop projects.
But then at least you know what then at least you know what you're doing. It's impossible for people to understand why a design spec couldn't have been done for a project of this size, and I think it failed. We're just meeting departments all the time now. There's a cost. There's a cost to this. There's a cost in cutbacks, things that people don't have now because of the mistakes that were made. And I'm not convinced from you here today that the communication mechanisms are in place with your department and the other departments to ensure that overruns and governance issues aren't reported to you that will have a major impact on you in terms of your budget planning. I'm just not convinced from what you've said today that there has been sufficient learning here. And it concerns me that there's a normalising of what happened.
There's no, I'm not going to get into an argument here because I'm in good form today after Man United winning last night. I'm in good form. I'm not going to get into an argument, but I didn't for one moment suggest that this is. I didn't. Yeah, it wouldn't be great. But I'm not normalising this at all. I don't know why we put words in our mouth. I'm not normalising it.
I'm just giving you my perspective.
I'm trying to contextualise the reality of what we're dealing with. That's what I'm trying to contextualise. I'm not normalising it. I'm not suggesting this is normal. It's not normal, and we hope this is not going to repeat it for other projects. But I'm trying to give context for the challenge that the Department of Health and the relevant authorities have.
Just a yes or no. Should you have been notified earlier?
So I've answered that question before.
Yes, you should have.
I've answered the question before in relation to Deputy Director.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you.
We've been asked to take a break, so I'm going to break for 10 minutes. Okay.
Turn to the question of why he's not here now, why he wasn't at the PAC meeting earlier. Mr. Watt said, and I agree that this is a description of the truth, the real situation, legally speaking. It's my decision. You made the decision that he wouldn't come, so I accept that. But can you explain why you made that decision, why you didn't think that, given that he was on the board, that he's the Chief Procurement Officer, that he couldn't bring important information to light, or at least is worthy of important questioning for members of the Oireachtas to question, to find out about, given his unique position of being on the board? Why make the decision not to have him here today?
So I think, as I said many times today at this committee and the earlier committee, that Paul discharged his duties as a member of the board in ensuring that information was brought, that the chairman understood the position, and that information was then brought to the attention of the Minister for Health, and that was Paul's fiduciary duty, and that was his duty, and that he carried out that duty. In relation to his role on the Children's Board, he's there not as a member of the department, he's there in a personal capacity. I know that's a little bit Jesuitical, but it's important for the purpose of this discussion. Deputy, ultimately, I made a decision that David is the chair of the government construction contracts committee. That's the key committee that was involved in this decision in relation to the derogation, and it was my view that David should be here to answer questions. I understand that there's another invitation to the Children's Board for each member of the Children's Board, and that Paul will, in that capacity, will go along to committee as is appropriate when that invitation is received.
Okay. So in terms of the role that he then played on the board, firstly to say that, as far as I can see from the briefing note, you agree that the Circular 12/2010 in respect of the Code of Obligations for civil servants on state bodies applied to him in that capacity? Because sometimes it said he was in a personal capacity. It was a personal as a way of getting out from that circular, but you seem to accept that those obligations did apply to him.
The circular is very clear.
Yes.
The circular is very clear, and the code of practice is very clear. There's no contradiction, in my view, between the two. They're complementary. And I've addressed this issue in the context, I think, of the submission I sent in. I addressed it this morning at the PAC, that I'm 100% sure that Paul discharged his duties and he acted appropriately. Paul has done a brilliant job for the state over the last 6 years as head of the procurement office. He's established an office. He's driven very significant reform. The chairperson, in his previous role as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, we were aware of the significant problems we still have, but they're not as great, I think, in relation to procurement practices, in relation to unprofessional procurement practices right across how we do our business. And Paul has been very much engaged in the professionalisation of that function, and he's done an excellent job. I'm happy that he discharged his functions here in relation to this matter, and I have no problem. And I'm not going to get into an argument, Deputy, about the ins and outs of all this. Personally, I don't think it's appropriate that officials are named as they have been, which they're now named in the chamber, the Dáil chamber. It shouldn't happen. Happens now repeatedly without any sanction, without anybody saying nay. I'm not happy about remarks that are made about civil servants repeatedly where they can't defend themselves. I'm not happy about all that, but I made a decision in relation to today, Paul's attendance. I think he discharged his functions in relation to those servants, and I have no problem whatsoever.
I want to get into that, and to be clear, I didn't. Name him. He's named in the briefing document here. So a key bullet point here is the CPO was satisfied that matters were being addressed by the board and were being reported through the governance arrangements established by the HSE and Department of Health. I'd like to just unpack that a little. So that says, and that comes from you, and you stand over that, I presume, that issues were being reported. Well, why the delay then?
So the issues were reported consistently, as I.
But like, if we know from minutes in on August that they were aware, and arguably they were before then, that there's issues, big issues here in terms of cost, why weren't they reported at that stage? And does that not constitute that they weren't being reported through the governance arrangements?
They were being reported to the relevant minister, the Minister for Health.
At what time?
I understand there was information brought to the Minister of Health, I think, in August and September. That's what I think the minutes have said. So the issues were, the board was debated it, the chairperson undertook on behalf of the board to bring these matters to the attention of the relevant minister, and that was done.
Do you think that all relevant information from the board about the very substantially rising costs, or the potential for very substantial rising costs, relatively early to being discovered, were reported to the minister?
I'm not privy, Deputy, to the ins and outs of all the issues that the board were debating, because I'm not a member of the board, and I haven't had the opportunity to read through all the minutes of the board meetings and all the paper generated. But it seems to me, from everything that I've read and heard, that the key issues of concern were brought from the chairperson of the board to the minister. The minister then sought action from his officials, and his officials dealt with that, and eventually it got to us.
So when you say in the briefing note that he would have advised the Minister for Health if he felt that serious matters were not being addressed and not being communicated through the governance structures, the reason he didn't is because all the information, all the key information that he had already, or was very quickly transmitted to the Minister.
The concern was in relation to the cost overruns, and those concerns were brought to the Minister.
Okay, that's useful, thank you. The next question, you made an interesting point earlier where you spoke about a counterfactual situation where we weren't here. And you said, and I think it's fair, that on the one hand, there's different variants there, right? And one could be that, we don't have this overrun. But another variant is that it is ultimately the same price, but we don't just end up with this process. If it ended up in the second position, where this is the cost of building this sort of children's hospital at this time with these specifications, etc., well, then would that indicate a problem with the way that BAM tendered? Would it be an example of the lowballing that the Taoiseach was talking about?
No, I don't. So, if I understand the question, so if we had done a different approach, which led to a different outcome, would that suggest then that, based on this two-stage process, that BAM in some way came in?
If it turns out the real cost for building this hospital, as you've said, is a potential, is this amount, well, then does that indicate? Would that indicate a problem with the BAM tendering process?
I don't think so. No, I don't. Like, I think the issue here, like, I understand it. I wasn't involved in the selection process. I'm not involved, as you know, in the agency or the sanctioning authority here. But I understand that BAM were below their tender was below the price of others. The reason for the escalation in costs, a variety of reasons, in relation to the bill of quantities, design scope, each in relation to value engineering. So there will be a debate, I know that this will take place, about how this is apportioned out between the different players. But it's not the case to say that this is BAM, all BAM's problems. It's clearly not the case that it's all BAM's problems. There might be issues there in relation to the value savings. But I think that, like, I haven't thought about it in those terms. I don't think it's as straightforward as that. Like, there are issues around abnormally low tenders which have been raised. And that raises a whole variety of questions. Like, if, for example, a tender came in which was, we were building a motorway somewhere or whatever, doesn't matter, and there was a price that was 100 million below the second tender, and it became apparent that for some reason the Transport Authority had decided not to go with that lowest tender, the PAC would have them all in, and everybody else had them all in, saying this is an absolute disgrace that they didn't pick the lowest tender. Now, how do you construct a process which actually ensures that people don't come in low and then spend all their time fighting then with the that's the issue. And the way in which you stop that is by having the best quality information, and as David has been pointing out to me repeatedly, the best possible information, and having very clear, detailed design to ensure when it comes down to it that you don't have that level of dispute, that the design is specified so that you have, of course, the normal adversarial discussions you will have because contractors are trying to maximise their benefit, but that you won't have the type of issues that can lead to significant problems with delivering on the budget. So I'm sort of getting there in a roundabout sort of way, definitely.
No, yeah, that's
I think
going there.
I think the whole abnormally low tender issue, like, you could say, and there's a debate, and we've had these debates about whether you should say that you get rewarded top marks for bidding close to the median price. So you don't necessarily get top marks for bidding the low price, but the median price. But there's a danger then that everybody will try guess, well, what's the median price, and everybody will try cluster around that, and you'll end up not having the type of competition you want. There's discussion that you should change the weighting, so you should put less on price and more on the non-price factors. The non-price factors, though, if you're, let's say you're building a school, school is a school. Like, what are the factors that are going to enable you to determine the winning bid? Because they're all going to say we're going to build a school, X, Y, and Z. The factor ultimately that makes the decision is the price. Now, can you construct competitions that actually ensure that non-price factors are significant, or can you introduce other criteria into the system to help us get? But this question of abnormally low, like, I think it's a big policy issue, but I don't have the solution, and there aren't solutions that are immediately obvious and that are clear from us.
Let me pose you a solution, which is to have a state construction company that takes on these big projects, and therefore you avoid this whole process and the dangers involved in it, and the involvement of all these companies that are seeking to maximise profit, and the race to the bottom that exists in working conditions, etc., that goes along with
then
that.
Then you have a whole host of other issues then, because there's no competition clearly, because you have one supplier of the labour, which is a state employee, and you have all the issues that are related to that. Like, the public good is funded by the taxpayer, but the delivery of the public good is in a contestable market, and that's the most efficient way of doing it, and that's the construction market. We would like this market to be more...
Doesn't look very efficient now, does it?
We would like the market to be more competitive, but if your suggestion, Deputy, we get an ideological discussion about socialising the construction sector and what that would mean, that's certainly a policy matter outside my remit anyway. But I'd be happy to talk to you about it over a pint, but I don't think it's necessary for this committee. But it is in effect, there was a time in the past, because I've heard people talk about it, where local authorities used to do vast majority of their work themselves, so you had a lot and didn't have contractors. I don't necessarily think that was necessarily the most efficient way, but look, that's it.
Let me just finish with one particular question. Is do you think it's appropriate that it's PwC which is doing the review, considering that PwC is BAM's auditors, have received, I think it's 4 million over the past number of years from BAM? Is there a conflict of interest there?
Yeah, I wasn't involved, Deputy, in that decision in relation to PwC. I don't know.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I want to welcome Mr. Watt and his colleagues. But I just take a slightly different perspective. We're concentrating a lot between August 2018 and when it was approved in December. I'd like to go back before that, because I think that's only a manifestation of actually the problems arose well before that date. So I just want to look at the sequence. So firstly, the derogation, and when did the application come in from the derogation in terms of it being a different approach, as distinct from a detailed, once-off tendering process to being a two-stage process where underground was detailed, and you might explain whether actually underground has come in on budget itself, how much that cost, and then the overground, which was a preliminary in design. And a lot of the detail on that is shed in that the National Children's Hospital Development Committee board, they put up a press statement on their own website on the same day that it was approved by Cabinet, and they went into great detail. So you might just give me that, when that came in, how was it approved, did you pursue a specific type of alternative type tendering process, who signed off on it, did you have any further follow-up in terms of the application of that tendering process?
Please, David, yeah. That's okay, Senator.
Yeah. So the process began very informally, very shortly after the Matter planning permission was refused. Well, Matter was in around 2012. I can't say for sure, but it was very informal with HSE at that point, and how they were going to manage it. And the site hadn't been selected at this point. So at the formation of the board, when the board was appointed in, I think, August 2013, shortly after that, an informal approach was made at Paul Quinn's suggestion, being a member of the board, because of the default position having to use the lump sum contracts. So the procurement subcommittee of the Paediatric Hospital Board contacted us and suggested that they would like to...
Who was on that committee? Who was chairing that committee?
I can't recall, but I think the chair of the procurement subcommittee was Tim Boucher-Hayes, I think. But Tom Costello would have been involved as well. And other, members of the executive side, the team that had been appointed to manage it from a day-to-day basis. So that process began with an informal discussion. We have
That was roughly what? About...
October 2013.
Okay.
So we had a series of meetings, very informal kind of workshops around what would be an approach suitable for this. The GCC, under the Capital Works Management Framework, there is an early contractor involvement form of contract.
What does GCC stand for?
Sorry, Government Contracts Committee for Construction.
Okay. And who's
I'm the chair.
Okay, and who's on that committee?
So it's made up of officials from all of the main capital spending bodies, not just departments, so TII, OBW, HSE and so on. So they'd generally be officials from with a construction background, project delivery, and it meets roughly every 6 weeks. So it's a forum really for discussion and advisory forum for policy. And the reason the GCC gets involved is under the circular that introduced the Capital Works Management Framework and the Public Works contract, the default position is a lump sum contract, in recognition of the fact that that isn't always a suitable approach.
A lump sum contract is effectively a full, fine, detailed contract.
Exactly. You know, for maximum effect, you have to have well-defined scoped projects. Yes. So, some years after those contracts were introduced, an early contractor form was developed. Now, it's never been.
That's October 2013.
Yes,
Mr. O'Brien, right?
Yeah.
This project didn't go out for tender until April 2016, which is 2.5 years later.
Yeah.
So why? I'm trying. So
yeah, I'll explain. So the process was at a very preliminary stage at that point, and they were working through how they were going to deliver this. Because if you think about it, Deputy, in the context of September 2013 was the first time we saw any growth in activity in the construction sector since May 2007, when the financial crisis hit. So we had a very fragile construction sector at that point in time. There was questions about, there was very real concerns from the point of view of the board as to how this was going to be delivered. A project of this scale, had anyone got the capacity to deliver it? And so there was various approaches looked at. In May 2014, they issued us a note with preliminary thoughts. Now, they hadn't appointed.
That's from the board.
Yes, they hadn't appointed a design team at that stage. So they made it very clear this was very preliminary and will be subject to the design team input. A year later, May 2015, was a formal presentation with a draft proposal for the procurement strategy, which was essentially that two-stage process.
And that was from the procurement subcommittee of the development board?
It was the board, yes.
Main board?
Well, Tom Costello attended and a number of...
And they made a proposal to the construction... what's it name?
Contracts Committee.
Construction Contract Committee. Is that under the Department of Deeper?
Well, we're OGP, which is a body under the aegis. Yeah.
And they made a presentation to yourselves stating that they wanted a two-stage process.
That's correct.
Which was underground detailed, overground preliminary, to get the underground underway as quickly as possible. Yeah,
I mean, the speed or the programme for delivery and opening of this hospital was obviously paramount for all sorts of reasons.
They had the design team in place at that point?
The design team, I can check my notes, but the design team were appointed, I think, shortly after, just bear with me there, design team appointment, I think it was September 2014, the architects were.
Okay, so go from what happened in May 2015 then at your board.
So the preliminary proposals for the procurement strategy were presented. The process, first of all, I might add that the committee were agreed that a lump sum contract wasn't appropriate for a number of reasons. Scale,
Why?
First and foremost, scale, complexity of the project in question, the programme, because, as I think Secretary General has said...
Was the primary feature there to get the project underway as quickly as possible?
Not entirely. That wouldn't be a fair assertion. The concept around an early contractor involvement forum is to bring people, get the expertise in construction management of the contractor in.
Well, is it not fair to say, Mr. O'Brien, that there would be more of a risk of an overrun with a two-stage process with a preliminary design than going with a lump sum detailed design on both underground and overground? The risk not higher?
That's correct, but Deputy, if you were dealing with a contract in and around 20 million, that's fine. But you're talking about a project of this scale, complexity,
which would heighten the risk again.
Precisely. So
therefore, the question I'm asking is why? We're still a year off before we went to tender.
Yes. But for those very reasons, they knew that to get the project out and construction started.
So it really was, when it came down to it, to get the project underway, that was the paramount decision-making criteria as distinct from the cost. Because once you went away from the lump sum, you were heightening the risk of an overrun because you preliminary in design, right? So is that a fair assertion on my part?
It's not entirely fair. The intention was always that the design would be reasonably well advanced. It's not true to say that we're talking about a preliminary design that went to market here.
So therefore, when I read the National Children's Designs press statement on the 15th of December, they said the design was preliminary.
Yeah, but the tender for the project didn't take place for. Your date was again. Sorry,
My date was they put. If you read a press statement they put out on the date the government signed off on the Children's Hospital at Cabinet in December, I think it's the 15th of December. They stated that. Am I correct? 15th of December. They stated within that, they went through why the delays were there. And they spoke about Phase A, Phase B. Phase A was underground. Phase A was a detailed design. Phase B was preliminary in nature. And that then they would, it would then thereafter, and if you read further correspondence, it would appear in the contract that was signed with BAM that they had put a date of June 2018 to come up with the final guaranteed price. Now, that was completely overshot, right? So I just want to go to chronological order. So you signed off. I'm still not certain why you gave the go-ahead for a two-stage process.
Well,
I wish to be fair, right?
Well, I thought it was fairly clear.
No, I feel you're fudging it a bit, and I'd like to understand. Still don't like. If it was to do with they wanted to get the hospital, the Children's Hospital, much needed, right? And there was a huge public demand at every level that it would get underway. Did it take precedent over everything else in terms of no further delay in getting the project underway?
Like I said, Deputy, that's my core point is that that was one of the reasons, absolutely. But the other reasons were to get the benefit, because, again, scale, complexity of this project. Had you gone with a fixed price lump sum approach, first of all, it's questionable whether you'd have had a contractor tender on that basis because of the risk that they're taking on for a project of that size.
But sure, BAM accepted the contract. They took Phase A and Phase B.
No, that's my point, that the process, had it been a lump sum fixed price, the market interest would have been considerably less because the risk that you're taking on board with a lump sum contract.
Am I correct? Okay. When the contract was put out to tender in April 2016, BAM effectively, and the contract was Phase A and Phase B, underground and overground, right? You could have had two separate contractors appointed for both, am I correct?
That was discussed at an early point, Deputy, yes. But
when the tender went out, was it based on one contractor taking on both Phase A and Phase B?
Subject to agreement of the guaranteed maximum price, yes.
So therefore, when the tender document went out, did it facilitate two separate contractors being appointed?
No. Only in the event that there was a failure to agree the guaranteed maximum price.
Mr. O'Brien, what I'm really saying is that I find that contradictory, because in one breath you're saying that if you'd put out a lump sum fixed price, a lump sum final detailed plan, that you would have had less competitors involved with the scale of the project. Yes, you're coming along, and when you tendered the project, you made it conditional that only one contractor could be appointed to do both contracts.
No, well, the successful tenderer would have gone forward to construct the basement.
No. I'm asking, in the tender document,
yes,
did it look for one contractor to be appointed to both Phase A and Phase B?
That was the outcome of the tender, yes.
No, under the terms of the contract. Yes. It's an important...
Under the terms of the contract, the contractor who was awarded, having gone through the competition, and there was a
Could the tender document, would it have allowed two different contractors to be appointed for Phase A and Phase B?
No.
So therefore, would it not be a point that needs to be addressed, that there was a weakness within that particular process, because that meant whoever got appointed for Phase A and Phase B, they were getting detailed underground, but they were getting a preliminary design overground, which created a weakness in the procurement process.
And just to say, Senator, like what
Is that?
Yeah, no, that's not wrong. Like, and what could have happened last November, December, is the government could have said, well, we don't now like the guaranteed price, and what we're going to do is retender this phase 2 now completely after the preliminary works are done, and we have this detailed design.
Why, Mr. Watt, was it not allowed, facilitated within the tender document,
because the
two
idea,
separate contractors to be appointed for phase A and B?
Because the idea was that when the contractor would get there on site, do the works, would start be working with the design team to bottom out the final design, and that would then get to the guaranteed maximum price. So it was a process where you come in, start the works, get the team together, get on site, and then move towards the process we get to the guaranteed maximum price.
Could it be fair to say that there was an inherent weakness in that procedural process because it meant that you had a contractor taking on a contract who effectively he had to provide detailed pricings in respect of the underground, but overground was very loose and preliminary.
Well, this is the issue, that the understanding for the stage 2 process was that the design at the tender stage would be a detailed design, and that the approximate bill of quantities would be, I think, 95% certain was the expression.
And did you?
The issue, so the issue, Senator, like I think the issue is exactly as you described, as we've spoken about today already, that a derogation was given on the basis that there would be more certainty about the nature of the final design than was the case.
And did
That's the reality of it.
And 2 quick questions. Did you, when the tender document was issued, did the contract committee, or we'll say the DPER, have any role in terms of approving the tender document? No. Okay. And then finally, can I go to the monthly? It's on page 8 of your presentation, and you speak about monitoring actual spend against monthly expenditure profiles based on information submitted by the department to DPER so as to keep track of aggregate spend by each department compared to planned spend. DPER does not monitor expenditure at an individual project level.
Yeah.
Am I correct to say that that the reporting structure that you have would not have picked up, because the 191 million was definite increases in cost that probably hadn't been incurred to date yet, and the 200 was increases in scale as argued by BAM as the contractors, and that effectively you were just looking at profile versus spending, and therefore the design of your monitoring process would not have picked that up. Am I correct, Mr. Watt?
Yeah, so absolutely, Senator. In effect, the way in which we manage is on actual spend against profile. So what was profile for the Department of Health was the costs of phase 1, because the future contract, the prospective spending will be an issue for future years when that final.
Is that not a weakness in the monitoring process?
Well, there is an issue here about which we'll have to look at. So normally you agree, and that price is the price, and that's it. And then you say the school is going to cost 50 million or 20 million. That goes in the department that has to manage that within its envelope. This is different because of the scale and because we had this unique type, not unique, but a different type of process. And it may have implications for how we look at this in the future, absolutely. We haven't bottomed out that yet. We haven't.
And then the very, very final question. If you look at they were supposed to have agreed under the tender documents, the National Children's Hospital and BAM were supposed to have agreed a guaranteed maximum price by June of 2018. That didn't happen for 6 months later. So it overran by, it was 10 months and it overran to nearly 16 months, right? The overrun was of the order of 33%, 191 million of the cost. In fact, if you were to take, that's exclusive of VAT. I'm assuming VAT is at 13.5%. So the actual gross overrun is well over 200 million. It's about 217 million, right? Is it not fair to say, Mr. Watt, that the monitoring system you have should have facilitated picking up that level of overspend, right, which is nearly a third.
Prospective overspend.
Prospective overspend, right, of a third, right? And 191 million of that is definite overspend, right? And is it not fair to say that that two things, and in summary, to yourselves, that the tendering process that was established, a two-stage process rather than we'll say an overall, we'll say detailed process, lump sum process, contributed to the weakness, we'll say, in the overspend that allowed a preliminary in design, and secondly, that your reporting structures, procedures within the department should have picked that up, and because if it had looked at not just what was spent to date, but changes in spending, an increase in spending, that overspend would have been picked up much quicker and much earlier, and we wouldn't be where we are today.
But the picking up that overspend is an issue for the sanctioning authority to establish.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that but deeper would lay down the guidelines and how the spending is reviewed, and that surely the lesson to be learned is from now on the reporting structures from the departments into deeper should not only deal with profile versus what was spent, but profile versus now change profile.
Yeah.
So you pick it up earlier.
You see, in the normal course of events, this issue doesn't arise because a decision has been taken in relation to a contract, and that's then profiled for the years ahead. So a decision was taken in relation to a contract, but the final bill obviously was very different to what was envisaged, and that's a very
should this have been finally a lump sum contract?
So I certainly the way in which, from my understanding of it, and from the advice that I've received, it was the implementation of the two-stage, the way it was implemented, were the lessons that we have to learn. And I said this earlier, I'm not absolutely convinced that a lump sum contract would have led to a better outcome, but who knows, that's an unknowable at this stage. But I'm not absolutely convinced, Senator, but I'm absolutely convinced that the two-stage process could have been managed differently and better, clearly. Like that's stating the obvious.
Thanks, Mr. Watt.
Okay.
Deputy Cowan.
Thank you, Chair. We're all in our own way, I suppose, trying to establish accountability and maybe even culpability, ultimately to the taxpayer. And I know the Taoiseach has said, for example, that he takes responsibility on behalf of government for this overrun. But it's not, as magnanimous as that is, it doesn't stop there. It can't be allowed to stop there. And that's notwithstanding the PwC report that is ongoing. But just to go back, and I think, Senator here beside me has touched on it, I want to concentrate in this area. Who's responsible for being 450 million overspent? And it has a knock-on effect, and that is, as prescribed and not just necessarily teased out the 100 million this year, there's a multiple of 100 millions for the next number of years, which will force the same Taoiseach and others to row back on commitments they've been making for the last year or two since they announced the 2040 Capital Development Plan. And they've been slow to do that, but they're very quick to tell different constituencies how they would benefit. And, I'm told in the spring statement we'll get more details in relation to that. But that's, the Contracts Committee are the ones whom granted a derogation from the way this is normally done. And they did that based on information and a recommendation by the board or a subcommittee of the board. And then that allowed the government then to sanction it because they were happy that the Contracts Committee. But what I want to ask, and I'd like to see a written list, who's on the Contracts Committee? Who are they? Who appointed them? What responsibility they had? What expertise they have? Because it further appears that when that application was made to them, they took the word of the board and the information that was available to it. And it never questioned or scrutinised or analysed the bill of quantities or the expertise behind that document. And, you would assume or think, or it may be standard practice in the private sector, I would have thought, for an independent assessment of that. And maybe these guys are so much experts in their own field that they didn't need that. But that's why I want to see who they are, what they are. Because it would appear they took hook, line and sinker what was presented to them. And that gave the government an out. And everybody then proceeds accordingly. So that contracts committee then, it's responsible, you said earlier, to the Department of Public Expenditure, am I correct?
So, Deputy, it's a consultative forum that is housed, David chairs it, it's housed in our department, but it's made up of people
Who
from
who appoints people to the contracts committee?
I guess the relevant ministers would appoint sanctioning authorities. So let's say the Transport Authority of Ireland or the HSE.
They make a recommendation.
They make a recommendation.
Who they feel is adequately qualified.
The relevant
to be
officer would go on. Yeah, the procurement person, the person responsible for the main road projects or Lewis projects or whatever it might be. Yeah.
And they then play a role in government contracts. And
so it's a consultative forum where they discuss the evolution of the capital management works framework.
And if it were such that there was, if after the process that's not only ongoing here, but the PwC, if, for example, and I mean hypothetical, maybe I shouldn't be, but if it were such that they said that, look, we're not happy that the Contracts Committee adequately scrutinised or analysed the proposal that was before them in a way in which may have sent alarm bells ringing. How then are they held to account?
So I think the first thing to say is that the sanctioning authority, the sponsoring agency and the sanctioning authority, Deputy, are responsible for the procurement strategy. Well, ultimately, like the sponsoring agency, in this case, the National Children's Board, in consultation with and then seeking a derogation from the Contracts Committee, they're ultimately responsible for advising on the best way in which to build this hospital, whichever process.
Why do you need a Contracts Committee at all then?
Because the Contracts Committee is there to oversee the overall management of the capital management works framework. So it evolves. So there are various templates there about how we actually manage works, and that evolves over time. And this group of people, public servants in different sectors, come with their perspective on how did we get on last year.
But they offered they agreed to derogation, so it's their responsibility.
They agreed that responsibility for the approach still rests with the National Children's Board. But the Contracts Committee gave a derogation. They permitted them. They allowed them.
So they wouldn't have been able to proceed on that road without that derogation.
But my understanding of this is it, and the minutes are available. There's a detailed discussion about this. Like, it wasn't as if it was not a through. Like, there were detailed discussions.
Was there an independent analysis of what was put? Was there independent expertise asked to comment and make and inform?
Well, the board is made up, as you know, of independent experts. They were appointed by the government with significant expertise, including the then chairperson, who I think has 30 years' experience in this sector, Tom Costello, and the other people on the Children's Board who have expertise.
The Children's Board, I don't doubt that.
And there are people.
I know they were put there with the best will and intention.
And the people, Deputy, who represent the public service on David's committee, they have expertise. David himself is an architectural background. Others have involvement in engineering backgrounds and so on. And these are the people who, in effect, are building our roads, Lewis systems, schools, and so on and so forth. These are the people who are responsible for.
So we wouldn't have had a two-stage process, which has led to an overrun, without a derogation being given to the board.
We wouldn't have had
the Contracts Committee.
We wouldn't have had a two-stage process if the board hadn't asked for that and argued that was the best way to deliver this hospital. And
but the ultimate responsibility of granting it to them,
the ultimate responsibility
was given by the Contracts Committee.
That's clear. Yeah.
And who's the Contracts Committee answerable to itself? Who's? Like Kissinger said in Europe, who do you ring?
Who do you ring?
Who do you ring when you want to check the work of the Contracts Committee?
So the Contracts Committee is a part of my department. David chairs it, and of course, ultimately, I'm responsible for the management of the capital management works framework. Ultimately, Deputy, yeah.
Okay.
Because we're responsible, as I said in my statement, for the public spending framework, the procurement frameworks, which guide how we we procure and how we build and how we
So
manage these projects.
having granted that derogation and allowed the board to go down this road, which ultimately led to the overrun, and as you said earlier, you're part of another committee that meets on a regular basis to discuss weekly the capital spend on the part of government across all departments, and I would imagine extra scrutiny around the time of the estimates, and yet the information wasn't relayed to you to bring forward an estimate. It wasn't fraudulent, of course, but it had to be amended now because of that. And that amendment could have taken place before now, and that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is there was a contracts committee. They are the ones ultimately responsible for allowing the board to go down this path.
Yeah, so, like, I
And
think
that falls under your department's
I
remit.
think that the ultimate responsibility here for the procurement strategy rests with the National Children's Hospital and the sanctioning authority, the day-to-day sanctioning authority, which is the Department of Health. And I don't want to say that in a way which dumps on them. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that we're not involved, because we are. And I've come out here and I've set out our responsibilities and sort of set out what I think the lessons we can learn from this position. But certainly, my conclusion, Deputy, from this is that it's very hard from this remove, with the benefit of hindsight, to say that that was the wrong approach. But it's clearly the implementation of that approach did not deliver what we all expected.
And I would argue that you accepted, or the experts on this contracts committee accepted what was presented to them in relation to the bill of quantities, which ultimately proved to be the author of the overrun thereafter. And Mazar's report has indicated that.
The Children's Board gave assurances to the contract committee in respect, ultimately, of the bill.
They
of
did,
quantities,
and more power to them.
Which wasn't correct, yeah.
But I mean, if I'm on the board and that commitment is given to me, if I accept that, fair enough. But maybe the person beside me might insist on, I want some independent assessment of that rather than dependent on my acceptance of the recommendation. So, as I said to you at the beginning, my role, I would have thought, insofar as I can, is try to establish who's accountable, who's culpable, how can this be rectified into the future, how can we be certain that it won't happen again, and in trying to find out, as I said earlier, the Taoiseach can say he takes responsibility and run off. It's not as simple as that. And from what I've heard here today especially, I'm convinced that the Contracts Committee, it was asked for a derogation and it granted it. And it has some responsibility and culpability, I would have thought. And to that end, as a member of the Budget Oversight Committee, I'd just like to see who's on this committee. That's all.
Yeah.
And I know you've given me minutes and so forth, and I can check it against
Yeah,
that.
we can provide that, Deputy. Yeah, those details are.
So in the future, then, maybe there should be more independent assessment sought by those committees rather than relying on the expertise that's there. Because with all due respect to the expertise that's there, it was sold a pup.
But these are issues that you can put, or members of the House can put to the National Children's Board when they come before you.
I can put it to them, but like I said to you, everyone's trying to evade responsibility here, as far as I can see. And I don't mean, maybe that sounds a bit more severe than it is. And we're all trying to get to the bottom of this because we have a responsibility to the taxpayer. I have, because it's them that'll put me here, or won't. And a derogation was sought, and if it hadn't been sought, we wouldn't have had a contract similar to akin to what we have in the story.
But if it hadn't been sought, or had been sought and had been granted, we don't know where we'd be, because we might have.
But we know where we are.
Yeah, but
we're 450 overspent, at least.
Yeah, but it's implicit in your question that an alternative approach, Deputy.
Well, I can't talk about hypothetics. I can only deal with what happened.
Yeah,
and I have to analyse on behalf of the taxpayer what did happen,
why
it happened, and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, no, and I accept that, and that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of as well. And we're all in a comfortable position, ex post.
Yeah, I know.
Right, at one level, because we weren't having to make a decision at the time. Somebody has to make a decision at the time. Yeah.
Can I just walk down through a couple of questions just to clarify it for myself?
Yep.
The contract for the National Children's Hospital, was that an open contract, restricted contract, negotiated contract? How do you describe the contract?
Open contract, I think, is the description of it. Open then negotiable.
There was a tender, and the tender was run.
Do you describe it as open restricted, negotiated?
The tender was run under the restricted procedure. The contract was the basement works were a fixed price or lump sum contract. The superstructure works, phase 2, I think they're called, were a remeasurable contract to arrive at a guaranteed maximum price.
So the tender was restricted?
The restricted procedure was used. So it was advertised as normal on the ODU, a short list of contractors drawn up, and then they were invited to tender.
Right. So to go back then to the committee, this contracts committee, who is the chair and secretary of that committee?
I'm the chair.
And the secretary?
The secretary is in the OGP, colleague. Secretariat is provided by the OGP.
And can you name the secretary?
Well, is it important to name it? I mean, we can provide a list to the deputy.
So we're
I
official
just want to
in the
know,
OGP.
yeah, just asking.
Yeah.
official in the department, Chair.
So there's an official in the department?
An official yeah.
Okay, in the OGP?
Yeah.
Okay. And would the chairman, that's yourself, and this official from the OGP, would they have been reporting to the person over the OGP, who's over the OGP?
The Chief Procurement Officer, Paul Quinn.
Mr. Quinn. I'm sorry for naming him, Mr. Watt, but I think that I wasn't the first one to name him.
Doesn't matter now, Chair.
No, it doesn't. So
Cat's out
Mr.
of the
Quinn
bag.
is the, just to follow this now, Mr. Quinn is over the Office of Government Procurement. You chair a committee for the contracts under the OGP. The secretary of the committee is an official from the OGP. Is that correct? So then, Mr. Watt, were you aware then that derogation was being sought from the Government Contracts Committee on behalf of the hospital?
No, at the time it was being sought, no, I wasn't aware of it, no.
Okay. Well then, Mr. Quinn, then, do you think that there might have been a conflict of interest between the board of the National Children's Hospital and in particular the head of the OGP they're asking for a derogation from the Contracts Committee that is chaired by you, that has an official from the OGP on it, and that is headed by Mr. Quinn? Is that not a conflict of interest in terms of the same players, or one player being on the board of the Children's Hospital and the others being on a committee which essentially answer to Mr. Quinn as the Chief Procurement Officer? Is that not odd?
I can't comment on I don't see where the conflict of interest arises, because the
Well,
committee
you have
is...
the Children's Hospital board.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
And you have present on that board, as a
Yeah.
member, the Chief Procurement Officer. That board is making an application for derogation to the committee chaired by you under the OGP, under the remit of Mr. Quinn, and the secretariat to that is a member of staff of the OGP.
Yeah.
That's a conflict of interest. And can you outline for me the other members? Are they all from within the OGP, or are they from elsewhere? You didn't give the names.
So they're from the National Roads Authority, the Department of Education, Skills, Department of Environment, Community. This is, now I'm reading out the 2015 list here, but I'm sure the same bodies are represented, different carnations, of course. The National Development Finance Agency, OPW, the Health Service Executive, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, Department of Defence, Rail Procurement Agency, which is now the TII. So it'll be the main bodies, Chair, that are involved. Like, I think...
But to address my point then...
Yeah, like like it's not a like the Contracts Committee and the National Children's Board, they're all on the same team trying to deliver the hospital the best possible way for the country. It's not as if there's a conflict. And we talk about
there's no tension or dynamic there.
we talk about an application for a derogation. Like, my sense of reading through the minutes is that there's a dialogue, a conversation where the people who are experts and experience are trying to use their expertise to help the National Children's. The National Children's Board comes with a proposal, an outline proposal, and there's a debate, a conversation, a dialogue. So we shouldn't have probably given the impression that it's a formal application like that. I think it's a debate, a consultation, which went on over 18 months, a rolling conversation, which eventually led to a collective view that this option was the best option. Now, except what Deputy Cowan said earlier, I wouldn't want to characterise it as a potential conflict, Chair, because it's not. They're all trying to do the same job.
But they're all in-house.
Well, the Children's Hospital people were mostly outsiders. Nearly all of them outsiders.
No,
but the people here, these are public servants,
The OGP, they're all in-house. They're all officials.
They're officials working with the government, yeah.
And the head of those officials, OGP, is represented on the board of National Children's Hospital.
So
that's correct, isn't it?
Most of the officials here.
Isn't it absolutely correct now, Mr. Watt?
Well, look, I don't want to. It's late in the day now to be falling out with each other, but most of them, Chair, like David obviously works in the OGP with Paul. The other bodies, and I won't read them out. They work for other departments and other agencies.
I'll just move on from there.
But you're right. Like, there is, you're right in the sense that the Contracts Committee is part of the overall structure, which is overseen by Paul. Yeah.
So the derogation. Do you know if the derogation for the process adopted by the hospital was asked for after the tender process was completed?
The application was well before the tender.
Well before the tender.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And then to go on to the public procurement rules and all the rest of it, there's no question of any underbidders or any overbidders or whoever they were in there taking issue with the process, is there?
Every procurement process we undertake, Chair, and you and I have debated this in the past, every procurement process in Ireland of any scale leads to either the threat of legal action or actual legal action. This is a very litigious area which is covered by EU directives transposed into Irish law, and there are armies of solicitors working for the main contractors. And this is a very contested space, both in terms of the awarding of contracts and how that's managed, and then the actual delivery of the contracts and how they're operationalised. And you're aware of the situation we had in Grange Gorman, because you quizzed me on it previous time about that situation, which led to a 3-year delay in that contract, and there are many other cases. So,
but in the
unfortunately, it's a
circumstances
difficult
where
case.
the figures changed, there was this derogation that the tender process then changed, or not the tender process, but that the circumstances of all of this changed. So the other bidders in it, if there was other bidders in it, they would surely have had to be asked, or, it changed and you stuck with the one contract, you stuck with the one tender, and even though it had changed, you didn't revert back to any of the other players. So has the Children's Hospital Board left itself open for legal action?
The contract as advertised and the procurement process set all that out. So the intention was there from the outset to undertake the guaranteed maximum price process was subject to change. So that was clear to the tenders that were taking on the process. So from that perspective, no, everybody would have been aware of the potential for, the process is designed to bring people in and work through the issues with the project to arrive at that guaranteed maximum price. So in terms of the procurement directives, you know, contract modification is covered by a particular article in the directives, and it sets out the circumstances where that can be done, and this would have met that. It was, you know.
So the 983 million price, 2017, where did that come from?
We can't comment on that. I mean,
that came from the outcome, Chair, of the tendering process.
Yeah.
That was concluded in 2017.
So when the Minister was here before, he said that it had grown to 1.4 billion, that there was another 300 million in terms of, I think, contingency. That would bring it to 1.7 billion. Are the figures relative to contingency likely to change?
So the contract that was signed was for 983 million, and that's now 400 million, 450 more, and then there are additional elements on that where outside the contract, outside the construction element, Chair, which gets up to the 1.7 billion. That's been mentioned.
That's what the contingency figure represents.
So that's in
the context of construction, or
that includes all the different elements, the construction and non-construction elements of the project.
But thereafter, then there'll be a cost for equipment, IT, kitting the place out.
So there are elements that are included in the overall contract. So the 1.7 billion includes elements that are non-construction. I don't have the list in front of me that are non-construction elements, including IT.
But are you aware that, like, the question I'm asking is that kit out?
The figures.
The 300.
We don't have the figures in front of us here, but my understanding is that 300 million is for equipment and other aspects to equip the hospital, in other words.
Right. So at 1.7 billion, it's built and equipped and ready to go. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, but you need to confirm that with the department.
I need to confirm it.
Well, I can't confirm those figures here.
But shouldn't you confirm it?
They're the figures, Chair.
We can confirm.
1.7 billion is the figures that you've articulated, Chair.
I just want to go back to the beginning of the meeting, just to clarify something. We did our best to have the meeting and be constructive about it, and we invited members of the other two committees, both budgetary and health, just to be helpful because of the number of invitations that you had received. And we notified the other committee members. And in our correspondence to you, we asked, because of the fact that your department works with this committee, that Mr. Quinn would attend. Now, you choose, or somebody did, not to have him here.
It shows, Chair. It shows, yeah.
So we will then invite Mr. Quinn separately. Is that an option?
So, like, it's up to this committee to be satisfied as to whether we've come here and outlined to the committee the role of our department in relation to this matter, and whatever about differences deputies have about where we are now. I think we fairly try to set out our roles and responsibilities as best we can. You know, it's my job to represent the department and take responsibility for the department. I hope we've done that today at this committee and the Public Accounts Committee. You know, like the role of Paul in the context of his membership of the National Children's Board, I think he said, I think the committee will invite the Children's Board, and he's happy to come along in that context, and I think that's fair enough.
The role of the CNAG, because that comes in within the remit of your department as well, is that correct?
So yeah, the CNAG will be the minutes of the CNAG and so on. Yeah.
Could the CNAG have been asked to do the report instead of PwC? Like, did your department ever consider that because of the fact that he is?
So he
did some reports out of this anyway.
So
he did value for money reports 38,000.
So the HSE decided to commission PwC to review this issue.
They had no consultation with you on it.
They decided that, and they decided that. I think I don't recall exactly. I understand it was the HSE, or maybe the government asked the HSE to do it. I'm not sure. Or the Minister for Health maybe asked
Because
the
of the
HSE
fact
to do
that
it.
all of this problem was beginning to grow and emerge as a very serious problem, a serious issue. And as the Department Public Expenditure Reform with your Controller and Auditor General, would you not have thought within the department that you would say to the Controller and Auditor General or to the Minister, let's get an independent assessment in here directly to us, which would be the CNAG?
Yeah, so a decision, I don't know if that's, would it be appropriate for the CNAG Chair? I'd have to look at their mandate and see if that would be appropriate. Excuse me, they do reviews, but it tends to be reviews ex post of spending that's been incurred as opposed to an issue around a project that's
well, all of this had occurred.
The preliminary expenditure had occurred, yeah. You could make a case. The HSE, on the instruction of the Minister, I can't recall exactly the Minister, the HSE, there's a report now being commissioned by PwC and they're doing their work. Of course, there are other options for that.
Just to get on to the end of this then, it starts off with the National Children's Hospital as a project, the government wanting to achieve it. The National Development Finance Agency had a role in terms of advices up to 2014, according to your own note I'm reading from. So at one stage the NDFA were involved. The government, that's the Cabinet, made the decision. The Department of Health was involved because that's the overseeing department in terms of the spend. The HSE was involved because, they ended up...
It's a health facility, yeah?
Yeah, health facility, and they end up deciding to have PwC in there. You have your own department. You have the Contracts Committee. And you have advices then be given by the OGP directly to the National Children's Hospital Board, and you had someone on that board. And in spite of all of that government involvement, from political to the various structures that I've called out, you've managed, not you've managed, but they collectively have managed to make a right cock-up of the cost of the Children's Hospital. And even in accounting for it, and I appreciate your role in this, it's spread to so many different agencies, and for one reason or another, each agency is able to wash its hands and say, no, that's really not for me, that's for the lads over there.
Yeah.
And I just, looking back over the history of expenditure in the state, there was very good expenditure, and I agree with what you're saying, there was a lot of over expenditure. The state really has learned very little. Like, would I do that in private industry? You'd run a mile from it if you didn't. Have your price secured, have your money secured, have your professionals in place. And we seem to have had layers of professionals in place.
From private industry.
What?
From private industry.
No.
Yes.
No.
Children's Hospital Board.
Your contract details, your DEEPR, your HSE, your Department of Health. How did you all come together and arrive at a situation where not only can we not get a handle on how much it's going to cost us when it's finished, but we can't even get a handle on the efficiency of the spend or the bad spend that took place in the context of it? Really,
I don't, like, as I've said repeatedly throughout the day, there are a variety of issues, and I think there are clear issues about what we learn from. Like, I think the governance, my sense of the governance structure, Chair, is clear enough. The National Children's Board were established to deliver this hospital, and they're full of people with very significant expertise. And the authority was the Department of Health. There's a role for the Contracts Committee, but that it was very clear in terms of the Children's Board and the Department of Health in terms of roles here. There are a whole variety of issues which are clearly being aired in terms of how this is managed, and we need to ensure that that doesn't happen again. I just say, I don't wish to be discordant or disagree with you, it's not true to say that this doesn't happen in the private sector. It happens all the time in the private sector. You don't hear about it, and somebody involved doesn't spend 9 hours in one day in front of all committees talking about it.
No, because we sacked.
No, it doesn't work like that.
It does work like that,
I'm
yeah.
afraid it doesn't. There are cost overruns and construction problems all the time in the private sector, constructing anything and everything. And there's a system in place. And anyway, look, anyway, it's not. And I don't think it's about figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it.
We're duty bound to actually find. You spoke about what, where, when, and how, right? We're duty bound as a committee to ask the questions. And like when it distills down to it, right? It's 50% over budget. It's 450. It's 50. That's 450 million.
Significant,
Taxpayers' money. It's just. No, it's a project that needs to happen. Just one or two things that I asked Mr. O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien, the overrun, Phase A, which is the underground, Phase B, the overground, the overrun, the 450 million of that, has the underground project, has that come in on budget, the lump sum element of the project?
We'll come back to you.
We'll come back. We don't.
Senator, on that. We'll come back to you.
We don't have those figures. No.
Okay. And then the final thing is, when they came to you in May 2015 to the the construction committee, is it contracts committee? Yeah. Contracts. When you came and the board, Children's Hospital Board, made a formal proposal to you in May 2015, did they give an indication of what the cost of the Phase B, which is the overground, an indicative cost? Did they give an indicative cost at that time?
No, I mean only the budget figures that were discussed at that particular time.
And what was the budget figure at that time?
At that time, I think we were talking pre-tender. I think it was 650. I think.
And was that based on professional? Had they gone away and got professional quantity surveyors and professionals to come up with that price?
They were all part of the team, as far as I'm aware.
And did you get any opportunity as a contracts committee to do any independent verification of those?
No, that's not our role. I think, as the Secretary-General has outlined, sanction and oversight is a matter for the sanctioning authority and the sponsoring agency. We're purely an advisory group that are there, set up really under the circular that introduced the Public Works contract to establish the circumstances whether a different approach to the standard lump sum contract.
And who would you given that a recommendation to? Who would have made the request? That come to Children's Hospital?
The board of the Children's Hospital, who are, set up
and did you
to deliver the project.
Did you give them the authorisation then? Did that come from the Contracts Committee, or who did it come from?
Well, it's simply the authorisation is that they don't have to use the standard Public Works contract. They are then to develop their own strategy. We advise and we certainly discuss, and as the Secretary-General outlined, there's extensive discussion that went on the matter. And on the basis of the circumstances of the project, that was, the agreement was, in principle, amongst the committee. It's not me that makes the decision. There's, a lot of expertise around that table. That then is the basis of the derogation. We're satisfied that a lump sum approach is not suitable in the circumstances.
Just to finish on your two notes, Mr. Watt. You were talking about, in this note, you're talking about the role of the OGP, Office of Government Procurement, and the Chief Procurement Officer. That you're saying that the CPO was satisfied that matters were being addressed by the board and being reported through the governance arrangements established by the HSE and the Department of Health. And then you go on to say that the CPO would have advised the Minister for Health if he felt that serious matters were not being addressed and were not being communicated to the Department of Health through the governance structures. Now, I take from that the Chief Procurement Officer was satisfied that the chairman of the Children's Hospital Board was reporting to the Minister. Yes. That's what I take from that. But what I would like to know is, what was he reporting to the Minister? Because he's satisfied that the process was working. That means he was satisfied that the then chairman was reporting to the Minister.
Yeah.
How do I find out what he was reporting to the Minister?
I think that the Minister has said that he received reports from the chairman in terms of the cost issues that were arising.
No, but within the Department of Health,
and I think
would
the
there
minutes,
be records of phone calls, of private meetings?
I'm sure there are, and
Okay.
I think the Minister may have met.
Okay.
I don't know, but I think the Minister or officials
and
have met.
To add to the list I read to you earlier on, it says here in your note, in section 3, the board was established by ministerial order, fine. It was there to plan, design, build, furnish and equip the National Hospital in accordance with a brief approved by the HSE with the prior consent of the Minister. And then it goes on to talk about the National Development Finance Agency. They assisted with a review of the financial robustness of the design team of architects, quantity surveyors and engineers. The NDFA has had no involvement in the project since 2016, when the NDFA's formal engagement as advisor to the HSE ended. I mean, extraordinary that another agency did all of this. And we can't forget the fact that the Comptroller and Auditor General also did value for money, I think, audits, and the charge on it was €38,000. And in spite of all of that, this happened. And that needs to be said over and over again. So we haven't got to the end of it by a long shot. So if you were concerned, Mr. Watt, about officials and the civil servants or whatever not doing their job, or indeed a minister not doing his job, would you feel obliged to say it?
So sorry, Chair. If I felt that somebody wasn't advising the Minister.
No, if you felt that there was something wrong here in the context of how that board performed, or even officials within your own department, or the Department of Health, or whoever else is involved in it, or indeed the Minister, would there be any information that, or sorry, would you take an action on that? Would you put the information before this committee, PAC or the Health Committee?
So if I was on a board,
without covering up anything.
So the position is that as a member of a board, that concerns are raised, and those concerns should be relayed from the chair of the board to the relevant minister. And if you feel that the chair is not doing that, then you're obligated under the code to bring those concerns directly to the minister yourself, if the matter is sufficiently serious.
Yeah, but I'm
That's what
talking
the code
about,
says.
you're now accounting here, or you're engaging with us here, giving us the background. And you're a long time serving as a senior civil servant, the most senior civil servant in the country, to quote the news today.
Don't believe everything you read in the news, Chair.
And I'm just wondering, you're strong enough a character to put before any committee anything that you might see that you believe would have been wrong. That's the question I'm asking.
So
I don't disbelieve you. I'm just saying that,
So we have
in terms of how politics engages with civil servants.
So we have a culture in our department of engagement and robust engagement, and people are encouraged to speak up, and they're encouraged to bring concerns to management or the minister. Absolutely. That's the culture that we try to develop, yeah.
Okay. I think that brings our meeting to an end. And I want to thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Chair.
Watt. You spent all day at this, and your officials. And we've ended the meeting without a row. It stands to both of us that we're maturing as we go along in our exchanges.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're adjourned now on the 12th of March at 2 p.m.